The main character saw that guy again in her dream, but she just stood there, frozen, totally helpless. Girl woke up wondering if her powers had vanished. Hadn't used them in ages. Just then, a guy shouted, "Sharn, good thing you're up. Freelina sent an invite to the Imperial Palace." Walking through the palace halls, Sharn wondered, how long had it been since a slave's foot touched this place? Her homeland, Cerseum Island, fell 10 years ago. 3 years after that, they caught her and Pachin and sold him into slavery. When all the servants and slaves arrived at the inner palace, head steward Catherine called him in and said she'd brought him together for a reason. Explained the emperor's coming back soon. Plenty of jobs needed in the palace. Crowd grumbled. Rumors said working for the crazy emperor was like going nuts yourself. Sharn noticed this was the first time servants and slaves were gathered together. Pachan muttered. It meant the war was about over. Unfortunately, the emperor wasn't someone the palace staff respected. They avoided him, scared out of their minds. Emperor Julian started the war, and now they say he's been butchering servants and livestock every day. The guy's been married twice. Both wives died violent deaths. Rumor says he was the one who did him in. Catherine asked if any volunteers wanted to step up. Added that proactive slaves and servants would get special perks. Noted palace work was pretty prestigious. Said it'd pay 100 cran, but no one dared raise their hand to volunteer. They all knew 100 cran wasn't worth dying for. The steward said if no one volunteers for castle duty, they'll just randomly pick names from the crowd. Pachan grumbled she should have said that first. Wasted time yapping. And why does Sharn suddenly remember her dreams now? Maybe mentioning His Majesty reminded her of the guy who shows up in her head every night? Pachan asked the sad Sharn what's wrong. She wondered if he knew why there are such bad rumors about the Emperor. She pointed out His Majesty spent years in war. Usually, people like that get respected and called heroes. Pachan guessed Emperor Julian's seen as a crazy mass murderer because of that witch curse. When she asked for details, he said 25 years ago, some woman got burned at the stake. It started when a regular girl became a knight to defend Baldak in that long, drawn-out war. She looked like she earned the Empire's trust. But after the war, backstabbing rumors made His Majesty act brutal. Emperor Julian made the woman, who risked her life saving the country, pay dearly for it. A rumor spread that this brave woman was a witch. Next thing, they tied her to a post. The same voices that once cheered her on now screamed to light the fire and kill the devil's bitch. Those people, praising her as a hero and showing trust, they were just lying. She realized she'd somehow messed with the Empire, so they decided to erase her unfairly. She was so furious, she called His Majesty a pile of trash, good for nothing on this earth. Wrongfully condemned, she screamed, "Is being burned alive a fair price for my loyalty to this country? The only crimes I've committed are serving this empire and my knightly vow of loyalty." The woman tied to the pole demanded, "What did you do as a ruler, Julian? Just ran away from the empire and left your people to rot?" He lost his cool and barked, "Step it up! Make that fire hotter and smash her face in!" The crowd roared in outrage. "How dare a filthy witch insult our great emperor? If I'm a witch, then curse this pitiful ruler!" Julian beamed and shouted to the crowd, "Listen up! She just confessed to being a witch herself." With the fire consuming her, she gasped, "From now on, the emperor will rot alive until his bones show. There won't be a single loyal servant left in the empire, and his heirs will starve like slaves." She turned to the crowd. "You're blindly trusting the nonsense this ruler feeds you, without realizing you're just working animals." She spat. "Your words, the rocks you throw, the fire you lit, none of it's worth a damn. Nothing's going to change." The people started shouting for the flames to be cranked up and hurled more rocks at the witch to shut her up forever. In her final moments, she thought, "I wish I hadn't believed in the best until the very end." She decided she wanted to become the wind after death, free from everyone, living for herself. Pachan summed it up. Nobody wanted any connection to the imperial family anymore. Every word of that witch came true. The girl decided she needed to be way more careful, since the Empire executes magic users, and it's all that damn curse's fault. She told him she was heading home to change, and Pachan asked her to grab his clothes too. Sharn knew working for the cursed emperor was a death trap. But hey, the pay was 100 cran a week. She was counting on saving enough to buy her freedom and clear her parents' debts. In her head, she was already a free woman. No debts, no chains, no one pulling her strings. Suddenly, a sharp whiff of blood hit Sharn's nose. Before she could blink, a cold blade was pressed to her throat. One of the maids burst in, telling Catherine His Majesty had arrived and was heading to the training grounds alone. She said it was impossible. The emperor wasn't due for 3 more days. But a guy in blood-soaked armor had a weapon at the slave girl's throat, asking who she was and what she was doing here. Her eyes adjusted to the dark, and there, behind the thug, was a dead horse. Sharn realized right then, the killer emperor was standing right in front of her. He demanded she explain what she was doing, but that dark aura around him? Terrifying. She mumbled she was there by accident. He just smiled and said, "Everyone always says that." She decided to run. No way she'd let him kill her without a fight. Sharon was wondering how much closer he'd get and how to shake off the stalker. The guy thought, What a puny, pathetic creature. And it's just a damn slave at that. Sharon called the man a lunatic and asked why he killed the horse. Hell, it's an imperial steed. He said he gave the animal a noble death. The girl wondered, does this killer think she's a total idiot? She couldn't figure what the guy was betting on. Does he seriously think she'll buy that the animal begged for this fate? Sharon's patience was gone. This lunatic was spewing total nonsense. She swung her rakes to scare him off, but the guy grabbed the end in time. He lifted her with one hand and said the steed ate poison berries. Imperial horses deserve an honorable death. The girl was stunned. This was an imperial knight. When Pecan's voice rang out nearby, the guy sprinted to the fight, hugged Sharon, and spotted the imperial crest on the blood-soaked armor of the man standing nearby. When Pecan whispered in horror, "That's an imperial knight!" the girl realized she was walking dead for threatening him with rakes. The killer didn't stop. He kept coming. She realized she didn't want to die right here, right now. Sharon made a run for it, grabbed a handful of dirt, and flung it straight in the killer's face. They got away. Pecan asked, "Did we just do the right thing? That was an imperial knight." Sharon was amazed. How'd Pecan spot the imperial crest on his armor in the dark? Through all that blood? The girl felt awkward. She thought it was just some evil spirit at first, so she attacked with her pitchfork. Sharon asked if they could pretend nothing happened. Pecan guessed maybe it's not a knight, but the emperor himself. Same blonde hair, maybe? The girl snapped it was total nonsense. Everyone knew His Highness wasn't due at the palace for 3 days. Moments later, news spread the honor guard had finally arrived, and the emperor led the group in person. Sharon spotted the pale-haired guy at the front of the column, the one who'd attacked her and been covered in horse blood. The young man caught her in the crowd, smirked, and Sharon couldn't believe her eyes. But that same night, she found herself tied up in front of the very man she'd thrown dirt at. He called her a rat and said he'd caught her to finally get answers. Her identity, what she was doing here. Soon, the girl, posing as a palace maid, would push a food cart through the entire imperial palace. As she walked, she'd eavesdrop on the servants' chatter. They were confused why Emperor Julian suddenly came back. Some believed the emperor sensed danger because the chancellor ruled for years after his father's death. They muttered bloody times were coming, but Sharon tuned it out. Rumors didn't matter to her. Sharon marched into the stable, called out to Pachane, and said she brought him food. "Helped the palace staff today," she claimed. But the room was empty, Pachane's bed neatly made. She blinked. Weren't they done with the work hours ago? A stern man's voice demanded, "Who are you and who hired you?" Sharon had zero clue what they were talking about. He figured Chancellor Albert sent her to tail him, but she kept denying it. She shot the ruler a rhetorical question. How could someone of his high rank mess with a slave? Your Majesty ignored it and shot back. "So that's why the slave tried to clock you and ran off?" The kid added, "Everyone knows Albert's got eyes and ears everywhere in the palace, including the slaves." She yelped, "I didn't even know he was the emperor, and how he just killed his own horse." Kid pressed, "So you think he's a murderer?" Sharon babbled, "I'm just a slave. The emperor shouldn't even listen to me." She added, "I was rude. I just misunderstood. And your Majesty gave your horse a noble death." Kid muttered, "She's not the only one Albert's bought. That's classic Chancellor, always looking to profit." The emperor said, "My warhorse was top-trained, served me for years." Then he walked into the palace and chowed down on those poison berries. Young ruler concluded, "That's a hell of a coincidence. The prime minister's definitely trying to kill me." The emperor said, "That slave's got a smooth tongue. But let's see if her story matches the guy she worked with last night." He gave the order to his aide. Moments later, they hauled Pachane past the tied-up Sharon and the emperor. The guy just got a chance to yell, "Sharon!" before they yanked him into some room. Girl froze, heard a lion's roar. The emperor smirked. Now it's up to him. Live or become lion chow. Sharon was confused. Had Emperor Julian actually thought she was a guy? She figured the emperor thought that way, because of the smell of manure and all that guy's clothes. Meanwhile, the lion burst out of its cage and charged straight at Pachane. Lucky for him, there were rakes nearby. He grabbed one like a weapon. The girl pleaded with the emperor to let the poor guy go. He's innocent. She offered to take the punishment instead. His Majesty smiled and said no one's holding the slave back. He's free already, but he's got to prove he's innocent. The lion kept advancing, leaping, snarling. Pachane kept swatting it with the rake, but it was obvious. His chances of survival were 0. The girl couldn't take it anymore. To stop the unfair fight, she screamed at the top of her lungs that she'd prove his innocence. The emperor snapped his fingers in order to stop. The lion instantly calmed down, and Pachane finally got to catch his breath. His Majesty told Sharon to begin. She said she and her brother were just common slaves. She added that for 3 years, they'd only fed the horses and cleaned up after them. Leaving the estate was strictly forbidden. She clarified neither she nor her countrymen had ever seen the emperor. She challenged them to explain which of them could be spies. Suddenly, Sharon fell silent, realizing her words weren't enough. She had to come up with a solid answer, otherwise her countrymen would die. She silently begged herself to think of something convincing. Then it hit her. The man from her dreams. It dawned on her. The man in her dreams was the Emperor. The fear she felt after waking up was a warning of today's incident. She remembered how in her dreams, the man was terrified, shaking like a child, clutching his sword to his chest. She asked the Emperor if he could ever let go of his sword when it got dark. She said she could help him sleep peacefully. The young ruler grumbled in annoyance and declared that it was all bullcrap because he wasn't the least bit scared of nightfall. Sharn told him she knew a way that would make His Majesty eagerly await the arrival of darkness. She promised it would fire up the Emperor's blood and bring him pure delight. His aide nearly fell out of his chair. He was a guy? After a few hours, half asleep, Julian was already sitting on his bed, rubbing his sword, heard approaching footsteps, muttered, "Finally, the guy is here." But when he looked up, it was a beautiful woman standing there. She bowed and greeted His Majesty, saying she came as promised during the interrogation. Julian recalled his earlier conversation with his aide and tried to figure out how the interrogated guy knew about his night troubles. He realized he'd told no one, but Collins reported to the Lord that no slave contacts with the opposition had been spotted. The aide summed it up. No more intel from spies, but he had to admit, it seemed the slaves weren't kin. Collins added he'd thought the interrogated guy was a brash kid, but turns out it's a woman. The Emperor scoffed. "This is nonsense. Someone's spreading a damn lie to smear his honor." Collins argued otherwise, but His Majesty ignored the aide's protests, declaring they had no vision issues and ordering him to get lost. The red-haired guy mused, it'd be interesting to see what cure the captured slave, turns out she's a girl, would use for His Majesty. When the Emperor saw the woman, he immediately demanded, "Who are you and what the hell are you doing here?" She identified as Sharn's slave and explained she came to help the Emperor conquer the darkness. The Emperor asked her to clarify what she meant, and the girl explained that some natives of Cerseum, including herself, possess a unique gift. She said she could see magic and manipulate it, which is why, in her dreams, she'd seen the Emperor wandering in darkness, trapped and unable to escape. Sharn quickly insisted she wasn't a witch, to which the Emperor snapped that he didn't care who she was, just get the job done. Julian ordered her to start putting him under, promising her and her brother would live if she succeeded. When the slave girl heard a chance to save her brother and herself, she sprang into action. She grabbed the first thing she could find, and the Emperor scoffed, pointing out how boldly she was digging through his private quarters. Sharn apologized for being forward and explained she'd figured the nightstand might hold something suspicious. She found a figurine with its limbs bound in rope and explained someone had used magic to try to kill the Emperor. She added the death would have been slow and agonizing, and Julian couldn't believe Albert had breached his quarters. Sharn promised she'd handle the figurine, and the Emperor asked if burning it would work. She told him black magic reverses when the target is discovered. She clarified that if a spell is cast, the effect only hits the original target, and now the target had shifted. Sharn held the figurine over a candle and concluded the spellcaster would now suffer a bunch of burns. Julian was impressed. The girl had pinpointed the problem the moment she entered the room. Sharn muttered smugly that one crisis was handled. It was late, and the Emperor needed his beauty sleep. As he drifted off to sleep in bed, Emperor Julian kept a sword close, clearly a sign of his lack of trust. Charles asked if His Majesty had ever played word games before. They wondered if it was another way to help him sleep. The slave girl cheerfully suggested giving it a try. Julian thought it was foolish for her to risk her life just for a joke. Charles announced she'd go first and called out the first word, but the Emperor just stayed quiet. The girl asked if she had to do all the work alone. Then Julian grumbled a word starting with the last letter of her first one. They played word games for a while, and Charles was really stressed out by how brutally violent every word His Majesty picked sounded. But His Majesty seemed to approve, finally cracking a cautious smile. The Emperor gradually grew quiet and didn't reply to the slave girl's next word. Charles told him it was okay to take his time and think it over. When His Majesty finally dozed off, Charles raised her glowing hand over his face to cast a spell. She was sure the Emperor would sleep soundly and dream peacefully from now on. Charles stepped back from the sleeping Emperor's bed and silently decided she was glad it all went smoothly. She figured she could finally relax. After all, she and Pakan definitely wouldn't be fed to the lions now, and the guy would be out of jail by tomorrow. When Julian woke up in the morning, he couldn't believe his luck. He'd actually managed to fall asleep. He glanced at the sleeping slave girl and remembered hearing a woman's voice whispering something like evening prayers over him while he was out. His Majesty was stunned. He hadn't even had a nightmare and decided to go check on the slave girl. The girl woke up to his approaching steps. The Emperor beamed, saying he'd come up with the word he was supposed to say during the game. Sharon was stunned. The Emperor announced smugly that she'd earned a reward for her excellent performance. Her eyes sparkled with joy. Now she realized nothing in life mattered more than sleep. The girl tore between doubts. Should she ask for her favorite food or freedom? But the emperor had his own version of the reward. He told the slave she'd serve him at night as his personal maid from now on. Sharon was thrilled at first, but then realized she'd been given more trust than she'd expected. She used this chance to dodge punishment, but the new role's conditions were clearly better, especially for someone in her position. Julian snapped, "Does the slave dare to think over the emperor's offer and delay her answer?" Sharon assured him it was a huge honor, reminding him she was a humble heathen slave. She asked if someone like her could even stay close to His Majesty all the time. Julian wondered, what's so terrible about taking a regular slave as a personal maid? She replied the chancellor wouldn't let that slide and wouldn't sit idle. Julian raged, "Does the slave think the emperor needs the chancellor's approval?" She knew how rude and presumptuous that sounded. But if the chancellor found out she was living and working near the emperor, he'd boot her out of the palace in a heartbeat. She explained that with the chancellor running the empire now, the emperor had almost no real power, and she needed a guarantee of her safety. Julian agreed and asked, "So what's the answer?" Sharon gave a nervous smile, scared the emperor would argue and reject the idea. The girl said, "As your personal maid, I'll not only have to stop the summoners, but also run secret investigations." She reminded him she was a slave, and of course, slaves have plenty of restrictions. His Majesty asked if she was hinting at freedom. Sharon knew it was super bold, but for the first time in her life, the emperor actually needed her desperately. She wasn't about to let this chance slip and said, "Someone like me isn't worthy of being near His Majesty." Emperor Julian smirked, and Sharon instantly felt stung. Was he laughing at her? Then Julian stepped closer and said, "Even if I'm the bright sun, a faceless slave like you'll still work for me." Right then, Sharon wondered if this was a normal conversation or not. But why did she sense the emperor's dark aura now? Colin burst into his master's office and asked, "How did you sleep last night?" The emperor joked, "You always run to me like a puppy. Your visit's no surprise at all." The red-haired guy didn't even flinch and replied, "Dogs have an instinct for weird smells." He asked, "Come on, bro, think about our old friendship. What happened last night and how'd the slave knock you out?" Julian said he hadn't slept that well in ages. Colin noted his master looked way more alert and begged for more details. The emperor asked, "How'd you find out the slave was a girl?" The red-haired guy said, "It was a fluke." He explained, "I thought the interrogated slave might be hiding something, so I peeked in the bathhouse and saw a woman's shape." His Majesty clarified if the assistant wanted to say he saw his slave girl with his own eyes. The boy replied that servant girls covered the important parts. Then he asked why the Lord refers to the slave girl as his own. The emperor didn't answer and told Colin to stop yapping. He ordered to head to the training grounds, inspect the weapons and armor's condition and quality, and oversee the warhorse training. The emperor smirked and added to inspect the soldiers' naked bodies too. Colin yelled it was gross. Julian said to check the soldiers' bodies from head to toe. Look for injuries, bruises, rot under their fingers, or hemorrhoids. The Lord said it's the duty of a caring officer, looking out for subordinates. Colin asked if he'd messed up. His Majesty protested, explaining he just wanted the assistant to be a caring, attentive leader. At that moment, the redhead remembered how the emperor had flown off the handle when he heard his slave girl was seen naked. He finally got why these orders. Remembered his lord's tough personality and decided to beg for forgiveness. Meanwhile, the maids finished helping Sharon transform and started whispering among themselves, admiring the result. Catherine noted it looked decent, though a bit too manly. One maid whispered to her friend that the girl now looked like a foreign noblewoman. Catherine said it was time to head to Emperor Julian. You can't keep him waiting. On the way, she told Sharon only one person in the world could pinpoint her true nature. She clarified that if the emperor says a stone is a pearl, by tomorrow it becomes one. Just like the slave girl now. The woman warned Sharon to feel unending gratitude and not dare look away from His Majesty. Catherine knocked on His Majesty's chambers and told him she'd brought a new servant. When Sharon walked into the emperor's room, he blew up about the clothes from the southern island. Frowning, the emperor ordered the girl closer and pointed to the paper in his hand. The young man said it was the chains of his future servant and held the document over a burning candle. The girl was shocked when the emperor personally burned the paper, proving her slave status. He declared that from now on, Sharon was no longer a humble slave and had full right to be near him every day. Tears of joy welled in her eyes. She was endlessly grateful to the Lord. Now she could return home and actually work. But her joy died when His Majesty handed her another contract. It said her service would end when the incurable illness was cured and a new empress was found. The girl raged this was madness. After all, who knew if that had ever happened? The contract was no better than slavery. The emperor calmly told her a seal was needed at the bottom of the document. Sharon said she didn't have one on her. His Majesty grabbed his sword and smirked. Her blood'll be enough. He grabbed her hand and yanked her toward him. But Sharon pushed back with all her might. The struggle ended when she twisted her ankle and plopped face first onto the emperor's chest. The second Sharon realized she was sprawled across His Majesty's chest, She jumped back, like she'd touched a hot stove. She pleaded for forgiveness, but he just glanced at her awkwardly and turned away sharply. Sharn was shocked by such a reaction. Everyone knew the Emperor had 2 wives. Both died young. She looked at His Majesty and thought he didn't even look like the demon on a warhorse, cutting through everything. She said, "If His Majesty needs a seal so bad, I can just scribble something on the bottom of the document." Julian replied, "No, nothing needed," and waved her over to sit beside him. Sharn started yammering about hearing the stewards paying 100 cran a week to anyone working at the palace. The young man muttered coolly, "I'll pay you 1,000 cran a month as my personal maid." The Emperor arched a brow. "That not enough?" Sharn asked. "Where do I stamp the seal?" "No seal needed," he said. "A blood oath is enough. In the East, they mix wine with each other's blood. It shows your loyalty to your lord, and he swears to trust and protect his people." Sharn asked, "You sure you want to take a blood oath with me and pay me 1,000 cran a month?" "Even though you're a former slave," he declared, "you've got magic. I value you. Paying you fair." Sharn thought, "I thought he was just playing games with me, but he's actually giving me my due." She figured the Emperor showing up in her dreams was a divine message. Julian cut himself on purpose with his sword and dragged his bloodied finger across the contract. Then he showed her another document, insisting it was needed for security to make sure she stayed on task. Sharn's stomach dropped when she realized the Emperor was holding Pachan's enslavement papers. Julian made it clear, if the maid slacked off or tried to betray him, he'd kill her friend. A month later, Sharn was mentally ticking off her progress. She trained hard in court etiquette, kept the Emperor's sleep undisturbed. She kept wondering why she still couldn't visit Pachan, even though he was literally under her nose. The last time Sharn tried to see her brother, the housekeeper chewed her out. Something like, "His Majesty's personal maid can't leave the main palace without explicit approval." But Sharn missed Pachan so bad, she couldn't take it anymore, and stormed straight to the master to ask for permission. When they first met, the Emperor seemed like a normal guy, not the icy demon she'd assumed. She was heading to His Majesty's quarters and heard a commotion outside. No time to knock, she busted in. Total chaos in the room. The Emperor was on the floor, clutching his head. She figured out he'd been cursed. He was thrashing in pain, so she sprinted to help him. His hand flung her aside, and instantly, the rest of his body looked swallowed by darkness. She yelled for him to snap out of it, screamed her name at him, but nothing worked. He grabbed the girl by the throat, and she realized begging the Emperor to snap out of it was pointless. He was already completely unhinged. A question flared in Sharn's mind. Were the rumors about the bloodthirsty Emperor true? At the same time, he slammed her to the floor. She figured it was all the Black Ring's fault. She tried yanking it off, but the Emperor was way stronger. He kept choking the maid, so she realized if this went on, she'd pass out. Summoning her last strength, she raised her hands to her tormentor's face, and suddenly, magical light spilled from her palms. It worked. Emperor Julian finally snapped out of it, spotting Sharn on the floor, bruises on her neck. He ran a hand over his scarred skin and muttered he'd lost his mind again and nearly killed his maid. Sharn noted how vulnerable the Emperor looked again. Even as he apologized for his actions, Sharn discovered burn marks on her body, as if roasted over a fire, then felt a sharp pain in her chest. It felt like her lungs were split open by rage, deep loathing, and the betrayal of someone she trusted. She couldn't grasp whose emotions these were, or why someone looked so sorrowful in her dreams every night. Sharn suddenly opened her eyes, saw the Emperor's worried face, and realized she'd just witnessed his nightmare. She wondered if the Emperor endured that kind of pain every night, and if the one who left that doll was the one who cast the curse. The Emperor said they'd have to tighten security. Sharn apologized for letting her guard down after getting rid of that doll. The Emperor replied, if it were that easy, the Chancellor wouldn't have left this palace. He remembered how Premier Albert had begged him to be obedient and take his meds. He'd lost his temper again. Sharn touched her neck and asked the Emperor, "These breakdowns aren't new, are they? That's how the last Empress died." The guy sneered, "You're scared, huh?" She nodded and snapped, "I need to know the truth." The Emperor sighed, annoyed. "I'm sick of repeating. I didn't kill my wife. I barely saw her except at the wedding." A month later, somehow everyone was whispering about how the Emperor had gone berserk and slaughtered his wife and her maid. Sharn wondered. Someone powerful, like Chancellor Albert, was probably trying to take the Emperor down. The guy asked, "Why didn't you run during the attack?" She answered, "I'm His Majesty's maid and shaman." She reminded him, "I swore on my blood to stay loyal. As your servant, I have to trust and protect my master." The Emperor was stunned. No way a maid who'd only served him a month would say something like that. Meanwhile, she was deep in thought, realizing this couldn't keep going on. She tracked down and destroyed that cursed doll, but it did nothing. The real killer never showed. Whoever's behind this is probably messing with the Emperor's head, and probably used the same trick to get rid of his staff. Sharn told the Emperor to hold on a few minutes, then brainstormed how to fix this mess after today's disaster. She knew he was a walking weapon now, but breaking the curse wasn't in her power. Magic was too risky anyway. Finally, she found the right door. A side room for servants would work just fine. The girl declared that starting today, she'd be by her master's side every night, guarding his sleep. She clarified she could stay in the side room, but the emperor said it wasn't necessary. Everything was already over. The guy asked her to knock him out and leave, but Sharn argued it was a temporary fix and wouldn't protect him. She explained that since the incident was magic-related, they needed to hit back with magic. His Majesty was stunned. The servant kept worrying about protecting him after he'd nearly choked her out. Sharn said she'd take it like today, and Julian scoffed. She was just flexing her bravery. He asked if she'd charge in if he had a sword. Shark screamed she'd do it without hesitation. Julian the Emperor posed a rhetorical question. Why was the servant talking back to him? When things settled, Sharn calmly announced she had a solid plan. She solemnly declared to the Emperor they'd unite soul, mind, and body as one. His Majesty was lost, confusion written all over his face. He asked, point being? Sharn stammered the union would help track down the magic source. The Emperor begged her not to jump him. The girl rambled. She didn't mean anything vulgar. Not like a guy and girl getting frisky. He told her not to over-explain. Sharn snapped he'd clearly misunderstood. She asked how a girl like her could even think of the Emperor when he wasn't even a real man. The Emperor's face darkened. What does that mean? He asked. Sharn replied she was talking about a unique kind of protective magic. His Majesty noted he wasn't asking about that. Then the girl realized he was referring to her thoughts. She said she actually proposed a pretty decent idea. But Julian's face twisted into another annoyed grimace. He clicked his tongue in irritation. Don't you remember what you just said about the Emperor not being a man? He reminded the maid. Sharn asked. Is that really important right now? While mentally scrambling to avoid saying something she'd regret later. She clarified she meant His Majesty isn't a man. He's the son of the great Baldec Empire. She started showering the monarch with compliments, but he just sighed. You've got a long tongue, maid, he muttered. He added it sounded odd, like she'd happily welcome any commoner into her heart, just not the Emperor. She replied she didn't plan on letting anyone into her heart anyway. She already has Pachan. Emperor Julian beamed. That's great news, he exclaimed. Sharn blinked in surprise. Then she announced she'd explain the protective magic that would fuse their bodies and minds into one. She said the Lord would need to drip his blood onto a brand new silk thread. Before bed, the Emperor would tie the thread around his ankle. Sharn explained she'd do the same with her own. She declared the effects wouldn't be instant, but with consistent use, it would work eventually. She clarified they'd need to stay in the same room. There's an empty servant side chamber in these quarters anyway. For some reason, Julian didn't like the idea of a servant. He asked if he understood right. She wanted to switch the cursed object. The girl happily confirmed it. If she took the curse herself, she could dispel it and heal, the Emperor countered. He said he might not know much about magic, but he figured it'd be dangerous for the servant. Right now, Sharn remembered how magic could break your body, depending on the type and how strong it was. But His Majesty's curse didn't threaten his life. It was more like brainwashing. Plus, since His Majesty has no heir, killing a direct royal descendant would be bad for him. Sharn asked the Emperor to make a fist, then asked if he saw how it was safer to control that fist like this. She said first off, if she got in trouble, Emperor Julian would look out for her, just like today. His Majesty noted she sure had a sharp tongue for a personal servant. Then, he reminded her they wouldn't be loyal to Sharn unless they saw some benefit. The girl told him not to worry, and suddenly realized the perfect moment to ask something. She asked if she could leave the palace for a bit, since she'd been studying etiquette and helping the Emperor sleep every night for a month. His Majesty said okay, but warned her not to tell anyone she used to be a stable hand. She figured her co-workers would guess anyway, but kept it to herself, then promised to come back soon. Catherine the housekeeper watched as the Emperor's servant raced off, her heels clacking like firecrackers. She decided to head to His Majesty's chambers to let him know the Chancellor Albert set up a banquet for tomorrow night. She added all the aristocrats from the Secret Council will be there, and Princess Stuart will be introduced. The Emperor pointed out she's taken Albert's surname and teased the Prime Minister for running out of single daughters. Catherine mused that even without a kid, Albert could just make one to suit his needs. She mentioned Stuart joined the Duke 3 years back and got an education fit for an empress. Julian smirked. 3 years ago, we lost Empress too. You already shopping for a third? Catherine said it'd be odd to hand the Empress role to some other family. His Majesty shrugged. No other choice. 2 top-tier families already offered their girls. Julian snapped. Now Albert can just shove his daughter in the seat. Nobody's using it. He added, if this goes down, I'll be stuck alone. Catherine warned. Your Highness can't fight the PM's will. He said, not backing out. Get Sharn ready for tomorrow's banquet. He added, need to play this right. Can't wait to see how Albert pulls his move. He asked, Did you handle Sharn's circle? Already done, she said. All the old staff are out. Last 3 years, she's never set foot in the palace. She said, few know her story. Might not be enough. Albert's probably already on it. The emperor declared with a satisfied grin that this would do. Then Catherine casually asked where he'd sent Sharn. The woman noted it was time for the emperor to rest. He replied the maid had taken a quick break outside the palace. Catherine sighed in annoyance, muttering the maid had still gone off to meet that guy. His Majesty pressed if Sharn really went to the man, and Catherine said she'd warned her again and again to be careful. She concluded Sharn ignored the advice and ran off to the guy who was dead. Meanwhile, the girl burst through the doors and shouted, I finally made it to Pachan! But the dorm was empty. She thought it weird. He should have been there for sure. She noted in her head she hadn't bumped into any old coworkers on the way. Then a stranger asked who she was and why she was there. She turned and saw a regular worker, definitely not a slave. She asked, where's everyone else? The guy said all the staff here were shipped to a labor camp. No telling how bad they messed up to end up in the mines. He added they work there until they die, getting beaten every single day. Sharn couldn't figure out why Pachan ended up there. Then it hit her. All the pagan slaves belonged to His Majesty. She wondered if the emperor had done this to her brother, then remembered the master threatening to kill a slave. She trembled with fear. She'd always done her job and never ratted out the emperor. She figured it had to be a misunderstanding. The Majesty wouldn't do this without warning her first. The girl figured the emperor was a man of his word, even went out of his way to check on her today. When she left the empty dorm, Sharon decided as his personal maid, she'd have to trust her master completely. She remembered how he'd thought she was a guy the first time they met, and asked why she was sneaking around like a rat. Then she recalled how the emperor had ordered a lion sent to her friend Pachan, then told her his survival depended on what the captured man said. She wondered what her faith was even based on. She had been endlessly happy before. She'd finally been free of slavery and enjoying 1,000 coins a month. She collapsed into tears, kicking herself for not making sure Pachan was safe first and just enjoying her new status. Sharon and Pachan had been inseparable since childhood. It felt like they always would be. No one expected anything to happen to him. She blamed herself, mentally begging Pachan for forgiveness and trying to figure out what to do next. Suddenly, a man's voice called out her name from behind. She turned around and saw Emperor Julian. He glared at her and ordered her to stand up. It was undignified. She looked at the emperor and asked, "This is all a lie, right? You didn't kill Pachan." But the reply was unexpected. His Majesty called her not just greedy, but outrageously bold, then ordered her to follow him. He brought her to the main training yard and said it was near the main palace. Sharon said she knew the place because she'd cleaned there once, and the emperor told her to look down. The girl saw her fellow countrymen, alive and well. His Majesty noted that they were his gladiators. Julian added it didn't matter who they were, since on command, they'd eliminate anyone by any means. Sharn asked if her countrymen would be treated the same way. The emperor agreed, and the girl glanced at the guy again with concern. But there was no need to worry. Pachan didn't feel slighted and held his own with the other training gladiators. The girl realized the labor camp was just a ruse. He'd actually set it up for Pachan. Sharn was deeply moved by the Lord's noble act and thanked him from the bottom of her heart. Suddenly, he ran his hand behind her ear. Sharn suddenly felt uneasy, her skin prickling with goosebumps. The emperor remembered giving the slave a chance out of desperate circumstances. He needed to survive in this cursed palace. Then Catherine spoke with His Majesty, promising to keep an eye on the slave at night to see if she'd actually help him. It was a shaky plan, but it worked, until the housekeeper one day voiced concerns that the emperor would spend every night with the maid. Emperor Julian laughed and asked if Catherine really thought her lord would buy into beauty so easily. She said, "Not at all. I just don't want anyone to break his heart." He remembered how Sharn shouted that she was His Majesty's maid and had vowed on the kiwi, so she believed he'd protect her. Another memory surfaced. The maid, eyes full of tears, insisting her lord didn't always have to win. He also recalled the maid's catchphrase, when she'd shout at him that sleeping at sunset was forbidden. But then Catherine dropped the bombshell that the guy was already close with Sharn way before they ended up in the palace. Julian had long decided words like affection and love don't mean squat. They're just head trash. He knew it was pointless to obsess over someone who'd already given their heart to another, even if everything else was his. Your Majesty said, "Don't thank me. This is just my way of keeping a slave in line." Sharn noticed the master was off kilter. He added, "You don't need to say thanks for tending to what's already mine." The kid clarified it worked the other way too, so the servant better remember her spot. He told her to never forget who's calling the shots now, and that anything she wants is his for the taking. When Emperor Julian left, the girl started thinking, does this mean she needs to focus more on the contract now? Missing her brother, she's been slacking in the emperor's eyes. But does Your Majesty even get how she feels? Sharn figured maybe a lowly slave could never grasp the heads of noble blood. Now she understood the headmaid's rant about serving the emperor, not just with work, but with your thinking too. Sharn decided if she wanted to stick around the palace, she'd better hide her real feelings. She was lost in thought about what to do next, noting the training room was a sauna and the air was dead. In that moment, Pachan marched up, called her name, and she jumped into his arms, babbling, "I'm so happy to see you!" He shot back, "At first I thought the goddess Cerseum had blessed me. Guess it's just Sharn though." Sharn told him to take a good look at himself. He seemed taller and broader in the shoulders. Pachan blushed with embarrassment. The girl looked at him and decided the gladiator life suited him. He hadn't smiled that brightly in a long time. The guy asked where she'd been all this time. He'd been so worried. Sharon declared solemnly that she'd become the emperor's personal attendant, treating his insomnia and dodging dark magic. She announced she got paid 1,000 crowns a month. The guy's eyes widened in shock at the number. Sharon clarified she'd be free from the job once his illness passed, and the emperor found a wife. She asked Pachan to hold on till then. He smiled and said he liked the sound of that life. He said the emperor's lion turned out to be well-trained, and actually ran away when the master showed up. Pachan admitted he'd doubted the job at first, but now deeply thanked the emperor. He vowed he'd give it his all to live up to the emperor's trust and become a top gladiator. The girl watched her brother, thinking how fiery his spirit was, even if he rarely showed it, always faking that everything was fine. Sharn was so happy things were finally good between them. They'd lived in filth for 3 years. Now they had hope. The girl asked if Pachan wasn't worried. She was right there with the emperor every day. Pachan replied he trusted her more than himself, but feared she might hurt someone on a whim, using magic. At his words, Sharon melted and said no man on earth could believe in her and love her with such strength. Pachan asked if she still remembered their promise, to get married when they returned to the island. Now they're both working for His Majesty. She said it was so she could eventually petition the emperor to let her marry Pachan. He immediately declared he'd always stand by Sharn. She shot back she'd always back him up too. That night, she headed to the emperor's chambers, thinking his words were harsh but honest. Sharn knew she'd looked weak before proving her worth. But first, she had to accept she wasn't a slave anymore. She told herself, from now on, she was a loyal servant. Her master's safety was the only priority. She marched into the emperor's private quarters and announced she'd brought insomnia medicine. Julian eyed the cup skeptically. "You sure this is medicine? Looks like mud and water." Sharn relished the moment. The emperor was right. It looked gross. But she wasn't backing down. In her head, she ranted about the threats, the suffocating tension, hiding Pachan, and that hand in her hair. She smirked. "The taste's probably rough because of all the healing herbs." She deadpanned. "Bitter!" The emperor choked through the last sip. "Fine, whatever," she grinned. "They say the worse it tastes, the better it works," she admitted. "I added a few more bitter herbs." Emperor facepalmed. "You're a total brat." Sharn flaunted the yarn Catherine lent her. "Starting protective magic today." Sharn tied one end of the thread around the emperor's wrist and looped the other end around her own ankle. Then she told the lord to stay still. He was about to cast a spell. When the girl started whispering over the thread, Julian suddenly wanted to grab her, but a second later, his hand dropped. The young man calmed, gave a quiet smile, and fell asleep. At that moment, Prime Minister Albert Stewart mused. He'd been counting down to nothing but tomorrow's banquet. He asked if the girl had gotten the dress. She said yes. He added, "You'll outshine everyone at this party." Albert remembered how, during the war, Julian fled the battlefield and came back with an army at his heels. He wondered if anything had changed. Would the emperor now grovel at his feet like a servant or vanish into isolation? The man said this time they'd finally get rid of him if the girl didn't mess up. She meekly agreed, then bowed to her father. The next day, His Majesty was dressed in festive regalia for the banquet. Colin noted the lord looked stunning. Then he snapped at his subordinate. "Stop staring! It's disgusting!" The red-haired guy reminded him, "I've been watching the emperor with awe and love since I was a kid." Julian scoffed. "That's nonsense!" His aide added, "You've changed since that new maid showed up." The guy noted, "Not long ago, the lord looked like a devil hunting heads. Now he's got some life in him." He guessed, "That's what happens when you get close to a woman. You're unstoppable when you're with the opposite sex." Julian sighed in annoyance. His subordinate clearly didn't get the real deal with Sharn. And at night, they were doing something entirely different from what Colin had in mind. The emperor figured if he spilled the truth now, his assistant would laugh at him for years to come. And he didn't want to have to kill him. Julian muttered he hoped his assistant was just as good at following orders and checking out soldiers' naked bodies as he was at talking. Colin said he'd heard Lady Stewart would be at the banquet and hoped she looked like her dad. Julian replied there was next to no info on that. Wonder what Albert's spies were up to on his side. The guy pretended not to hear, mind racing. Could the secret plan he'd received earlier involve the princess? Colin told his lordship Albert seemed to be trying to hide how low his illegitimate daughter's status was. The emperor shot back, no avoiding rumors, no matter how much he tried to hide it. Albert probably adopted the girl just to use her. Colin asked, "You're really thinking of marrying the princess? She could give you a son." Then Albert had put his grandson on the throne and take over. Julian scoffed. Did he think his assistant hadn't figured that out? The red-headed guy thought he'd never doubted his majesty. Nope, always in awe of his smarts and strength. Once, after crushing a monster horde, Colin asked his lordship how he'd picked that tactic. He thought burning everything around was genius to get rid of the webs, then herding them all one way and wiping them out. The emperor said he'd learned that from the chancellor. At the banquet, guests whispered how amazing it all looked. Clearly, the prime minister had worked his ass off. Some said this banquet was for the emperor, who was at the battlefront. Others argued he didn't have it so bad there. No one knew if he'd come to after seeing the monster. Someone wondered if he'd snap today. A warning to be careful. Apparently, a lady ended up with a face scar after meeting the emperor. Some claimed they wished the old emperor had another kid. Suddenly, a voice in the hall called for silence. His Majesty Julian Baldock had arrived. The guests gaped at the emperor's knights, whispering, "Could this be the powerful squad everyone's been gossiping about?" Another question popped up. Was the emperor ever that clumsy, wheezy kid who looked like a useless puppet? Many asked who the hell that tall, smug guy with the confident stride was. They saw a totally different man in Emperor Julian. Couldn't figure out what he'd been through in the last 3 years. An old man with silver hair strolled in, walked up to the emperor, dropped to his knee, and greeted him. He announced, "Your Majesty, your loyal servant, the Prime Minister, has arrived." Sharn stared at her reflection, muttering, "Is this really too flashy and revealing for a common servant?" The headmaid told her to hurry up. She had to pose as the emperor's wife at the banquet. Sharn pushed back. "Aren't I here to serve his majesty, not play his girlfriend?" Catherine straightened. At this banquet, the maid will act like the emperor's favorite woman. She said we need to contain the forces threatening his majesty's position. Sharn asked if the headmaid really wants the servant to take on the aristocrats right now. She noted she arrived at the palace a month ago, and Catherine assured there was nothing to worry about. She only has one job. The woman claimed the emperor's being falsely accused of killing his wives. The aristocrats think he hates women. They think he's still angry at his mother for abandoning him, and the kid only got power because he's related by blood to the emperor. The nobles think this crazy emperor, swinging a sword around at the sight of a woman, doesn't deserve the throne. Everyone thinks Albert's looking out for the emperor, but he was beating the kid up. But no one knows this, and if his daughter becomes empress, power will all end up with the prime minister. Catherine was scared. The emperor's only useful until the new empress gets knocked up. She told Sharn to show the world the emperor's got it together. He's not avoiding women anymore. Sharn had to act like she's the special one, the only irreplaceable woman in his majesty's life. At the banquet, the emperor was hitting up small talk, basking in everyone's joy that he came back from war unscathed. Now that peace has settled in, it's time to enjoy some favorite hobbies, like seasonal deer hunting. Albert answered for Juliana, figuring he's already swamped with training gladiators. The emperor countered that it's just a game. His soldiers are still wet behind the ears, while the chancellor's gladiators were world-famous legends. His majesty was told rumors are swirling Albert's gathering, an army matching the empire's strength. The chancellor suggested a friendly gladiator match to compare their strength. Albert's kids could definitely teach the emperor's brats a thing or two. The crowd murmured, debating how the prime minister was treating his majesty like an equal. Rude, even arrogant. Some pointed out even a father-son duo wouldn't be that casual. Since Albert's so protective of the emperor, he's got no reason to worry. Suddenly, they announced Princess Diana Stuart, Duchess Albert's daughter. High heels clicking, tension crackling through the hall. The girl looked just like the previous empress. Colin even thought for a second it was her. Princess Diana wore the same dress His Majesty's late wife loved. The Prime Minister's daughter, future palace mistress, bowed to the emperor, calling him the Empire's shining sun. She told herself everything was going perfectly. Father's orders followed, nobles on her side. She grinned. Just had to claim the empty seat beside His Majesty, until what happened next floored her. Instead of taking the prince's hand, Julian dumped his wine glass, red wine splattering the chair. He claimed his hand slipped, called it an accident, then ordered the chair hauled away, stained obviously. Banquet guests erupted. Shouldn't the princess sit beside the emperor as the next empress? But someone hissed for silence. Chancellor's ears are everywhere, and things are already awkward enough. Meanwhile, the prime minister was furious. His kid blew it, and now Julian's got the perfect excuse to take him down. A guy changed the subject, saying he'd heard a rumor, but didn't buy it. So he wanted to ask the emperor himself. He dropped that, people are saying. His Majesty's got a slave girl hanging around as a servant. The emperor asked if that was against the rules. Albert shot back. The Empire's son can do whatever it wants. He clarified it could ruin the king's rep. How's a former manure scraper hanging out with the ruler? The aristocrats started buzzing again, begging the emperor to think twice. This empire's reputation can't get dirtied. They screamed, "A common slave? No way she's allowed near the throne." Some guy muttered, "He's still off his rocker. Killed all his queens, now he's got a slave?" Another dude guessed the emperor's trying to dodge that marriage deal with the prime minister's daughter. Others argued he's young, dumb, and will flip out if you push his buttons. Julian raised an eyebrow. "Why the sudden silence? You think I'm here to take orders from you?" The aristocrat snapped back, "Absolutely not." The room just got icy. The chancellor yanked the princess over. "The war's over. The emperor needs to pick a successor." He declared, "I always give his majesty the best. He shouldn't defile his royal body." Julian frowned. "Albert, cut the crap. Colin, read the damn paper." The red-haired dude announced, "Lady Stuart's staying in the palace for 100 days to see if she's queen material." The chancellor was stunned. This emperor was no longer that easygoing, submissive kid who just did whatever he was told. He said he'd wait eagerly for his majesty's decision, but he still had one question about that slave girl. Right then, a woman's voice echoed through the banquet hall. She greeted his majesty and announced she'd arrived. Everyone turned, scandalized. Who was she, and why was she dressed in such an indecent outfit? Some recognized her instantly, that lazy maid. Only pagan slaves dared wear clothes like that. Sharn realized she'd never learned to face her fear or meet the eyes of the nobles. Then she remembered the headmaid's tip. Pretend the nobles were horses. She did it, shook off her shyness, and sprinted straight into the emperor's arms. She cooed, hating his majesty for leaving her all alone. Sharn added he didn't have to stress anymore. His love had arrived and was right here. The hall buzzed. Some were baffled. Why wasn't the emperor losing his mind? That woman had just leaped all over him. Someone muttered, "This girl was a stunner, definitely no commoner. Maybe she was noble-born from Cerseum Island." Plus, the emperor wasn't even angry. Either he'd lost his mind, or she was legit nobility. The prime minister looked shell-shocked, unable to grasp his situation. The princess? She couldn't even look her father in the eye. The chancellor couldn't wrap his head around it. A stable slave who'd shoveled dung yesterday was now inches from the emperor. That man was wondering if his gaze was too arrogant, considering she'd recently been nothing but trash trampled under nobles' feet. He sensed some eerie vibe around her and figured that's why the curse he laid on the emperor didn't work. The prime minister decided to get rid of her before she became a real obstacle and said he was shocked to see her rise to prominence. He noted the emperor found a raw gem in the stables, gave it a little polish, and turned it into a diamond. Julian shot back that the prime minister, as usual, can't hide his motives and keeps playing like he's the emperor. His majesty asked Albert, "Didn't they teach you that even rocks can become weapons if you sharpen them right?" Albert retorted that he must have been a terrible student if he didn't get how a rock dug up from a horse dung field could turn into a pearl. The emperor said he couldn't have predicted Albert would say that. After all, he couldn't even remember which field he'd sown his seeds in. He shot back, "You trying to say the emperor's vision is worse than his seeds?" Julian mentally told Albert, "If you're already picturing yourself on the throne, you're gonna make a lot more mistakes down the road." Sharn said she was tired and left first, though she kept thinking she was definitely nuts for letting herself sit on the emperor's lap. As she stepped out of the banquet hall, she let out a relieved breath. Thought it was all over, and she nailed it. She was glad the nobles bought her performance, even if sitting on his lap looked totally ridiculous. The emperor was probably stunned, but how could she play arrogant in this mess when she's just his personal maid? She realized she didn't belong in this charade and needed to get back to her actual job. She could still hear the chancellor's brutal words ringing in her head. "A pearl can't come from a rock picked up in the dirt. Rumor says the prime minister's got a friendly face, but at the banquet, he had that icy stare, like his hands were holding a knife ready to strike at any second." There were tons of chancellor's supporters among the nobles at the banquet. Sharn barely believed she'd have to take him on now. In the hallway, she overheard Lady Stuart and her maid chatting by. Catherine's words echoed back. The marriage is still on. On one hand, she felt lousy. This union could weaken the emperor's grip. But on the other, she was stoked about breaking free from the contract and heading back home to her island. The princess didn't look half as wicked as the chancellor. Sharn figured Diana had to marry the emperor to get her back home. At the banquet, Lady Stuart looked glum. Probably bought the whole "emperor's got a mistress" rumor. Sharn prayed the princess wouldn't chicken out of the wedding. She wanted to explain everything, but the plan had to stay secret. She just planned to say hi and not spill the beans. The future husband would handle the details. When Sharn introduced herself to Lady Stuart, the maid clocked her with a slap, barking about knowing her place. She stared at Lady Stuart's calm face, refusing to believe this angelic figure gave the order. Sharn figured Lady Stuart was chillin' because she had no idea she'd stepped into the middle of hell. Sharn said she got the princess's outrage. Lady Eaton, the maid, lost her cool. How dare she talk back? She swung again. but the princess stopped her. "This servant dared speak out to her mistress," the maid hissed. Sharn was surprised. Was that really enough to hit her? Her Highness asked Lady Eaton to calm down. After all, the poor servant might not have known the palace protocols. Diana asked if the maid was really from Cerseum Island. Sharn confirmed that she was. Then Diana wondered, do all the locals dress as immodestly as this maid? She showed up to the banquet practically wrapped in a towel. Sharn replied that the princess just didn't know much about the island. The climate's super hot, so their clothes are made from lightweight fabrics. Got it? The girl clarified that the lightweight fabrics help their skin breathe freely. Her Highness scoffed. From her story, you'd think everyone there walks around half-naked like prostitutes. Sharn thought the lady's disdain was obvious. She figured the Empire's people just didn't get the cultural significance of Cerseum's traditional clothing. She couldn't fathom why someone who'd one day be empress of an entire country would trash talk about another nation like that. Sharn silently felt bad for the Emperor. Having to deal with a life partner like her, she addressed the princess as Lady, but her Highness flipped. "I'm the Empress, not some commoner you can insult with a nickname," she snapped. Sharn noted the princess was sharper than she looked. "Seems like you overestimated me," she shot back. The girl told the mistress, "You looked pretty calm just now," staring up at her while she sat on the Emperor's lap. She added, "His Majesty was holding her so gently, making sure she didn't topple over from his lap." The words made Diana's face twist in fury. The princess's anger spiked when Sharn mentioned the Empire would be eternally grateful for the lady's show of humility at the feast. The governess went apeshit again, raising her hand to strike Sharn, just as a woman's voice echoed down the hallway. The headmaid demanded to know what all the commotion was about, with a couple of guards flanking her. She ordered them to grab the red-haired girl causing a ruckus, but Lady Diana objected, saying she was her personal maid. But the knights didn't stop. The lady then commanded them to back off under the Empress's decree. Catherine shot back, "The princess isn't the Empress yet, just a guest in this hall and way too early to start bossing people around." Lady Diana reminded her she was the Prime Minister's daughter and soon to be Empress, so the maid should fear the consequences. Catherine pointed out she knew Lady Diana had imperial training, but clearly the Chancellor overestimated his daughter. She tossed off that the time wasn't enough to master imperial etiquette basics and strode over to Sharn. "Hitting the Queen's personal maid is high treason," she declared. Catherine clarified the maid should be hanged, then stepped up to Sharn and asked, "You hurt bad?" Sharn was stunned, but replied, "I guess I bit my cheek. My mouth's all blood, and my gums still ache." She added her tooth was hurting, and the princess and Lady Eaton's eyes went even wider with fear. Catherine declared it a serious crime, and the red-haired girl burst into tears, begging her mistress to do something. But Princess Diana was helpless. She just stood there in silence. Catherine ordered her locked up until the Emperor personally decided her punishment. As Sharn headed to the Emperor's chambers, she wondered, would they really execute that girl? Catherine told me not to think about it, but Sharon was anxious. Yeah, she was mad, but killing someone over a slap? That's just overkill. Sharon finally got why being a personal maid mattered. When she was a slave, they'd beat her with a whip. When the girl got permission to enter, she yanked open the Emperor's chamber door and froze in shock. The Emperor unbuttoned his jacket and shirt. He wanted to change clothes. He told the maid to wait a minute. She offered to help, but he said no. No big tension here. Sharon and the Emperor were both used to being naked. The Emperor asked how she got that cheek injury. In that instant, anger crashed over Sharon like a wave. She remembered the recent incident where someone called her a lowly slave, cleaning horse manure. So she came up with a quick answer for the Emperor. She told him she was rushing, tripped, and fell. Her logic? The Emperor's an aristocrat too. He'll take the same stance as Lady Stuart. No way would some conflict delay the imperial wedding. But as the Emperor's maid, those words stung. She asked the Lord what he thought of Lady Stuart. His Majesty called it a stupid question. It's a political marriage. His feelings don't matter. Sharon asked, what if his wife turns out to be a good person? Besides, that'd probably help his insomnia. Sharon figured, maybe then she could leave her service and just walk away, heart light. The Emperor narrowed his eyes at the servant and asked, what are you talking about? Charles said she didn't mean to imply anything. She was sure the lady didn't know she was a fake lover. She added that today proved the future Empress wasn't the type to sit back and let things slide. But she was worried that if the lady misinterpreted things now, it'd cause problems after her marriage to the Emperor. The Emperor asked, what are you planning to do about this? Charles said, I can talk to the princess and set things straight. The young man scoffed. Why should I explain anything? I'm still single. Charles said, I just want you to be happy. And the Emperor grabbed her by the throat. Are you planning to keep serving me like this for the rest of your life? He asked coldly. He glared. Why do you tell me you're loyal and only care about me, yet you want to run off with that slave? Her eyes widened in shock. Then she stammered, Forgive me, master. I was out of line. The next second, the Emperor looked away, letting her go. "You're not casting any spells tonight." She bristled. "Why not?" The Emperor held firm. Charles stared at the bottle on his nightstand, memories flooding back to their recent fight. One day, she'd picked up the bottle, sniffed it, and asked, "Sir, isn't that strong liquor?" He said yes. She'd replied, "You shouldn't drink that. It might interfere with your medicine." She couldn't believe the master even drank this. No label on the bottle at all. The Emperor explained he started drinking it after he began fighting monsters. He said he had to do something to get any sleep on the battlefield after battles. The maid beamed and declared the master wouldn't have to drink this anymore. That same bottle's been sitting in the Emperor's bedroom ever since, and the main character's been kicking herself for talking too much. Maybe for the master, this marriage is just a tool for power, she mused. Sharon daydreamed. Marriage should be happy. She berated herself for speaking up. After all, it's a political marriage set up by the Prime Minister. She mentally reminded herself to know her place, not cross any lines, and remember she might leave here soon. One day, the Emperor's contract would end, and Pachan would earn a gladiator's reputation. Together, they'd run off to Cerseum Island. Suddenly, the daydreaming girl heard weird noises coming from the master's room. The Emperor dreamed he'd been wandering some dead, lifeless wasteland alone for days. His Highness was drained and parched when a woman's voice echoed from the sky. "The tyrant's child sits in its mother's womb." He recognized the line. And the next one, too. "All his descendants will live as lonely and poor as this scorched earth." Suddenly, the young man stumbled into a heap of ash. The voice declared the curse's fire would haunt him forever, just like the witch whose remains were nothing but ash. His legs, arms, and neck were wrapped in something black. Tentacle-like, slick, and writhing. He was gasping for air, silently begging this to stop. It can't be that this curse is eternal. The next second, the Emperor's hands were free, holding a dagger. A thought flashed through his mind. Finally, he could end these torments with his own hands. Suddenly, a bright light washed over the guy, and he heard his maid Sharn's familiar, gentle voice. She said she'd take all his master's pain and suffering. The dagger in his hand suddenly vanished, and the guy reached out to his savior. He saw a red thread tied around his wrist. Waking up, His Majesty went to his personal maid sleeping nearby. Mentally, the Emperor fumed at Sharn sticking her nose into his dreams. He ran his hand over her face. Her skin was so soft, it felt like he was standing in a downpour. And he couldn't do a thing about it, just stood there, soaked to the bone. It was deep into the night, yet the Emperor still sat by Sharn. He looked at the bruise on his maid's cheek, wondering who could have hit her. After all, it was obvious she'd lied when she said she'd just tripped and fell. The guy decided to first get a report from head maid Catherine, then ask Sharn again. The guy suddenly noticed the maid start twisting her legs and wriggling around. Guess that's her sleep habit. The blanket almost slipped off, so the Emperor adjusted it, tucking her in. He whispered, asking who'd look after her if her personal maid caught a cold. The young man noted he'd acted out of pure duty as a ruler caring for his subordinates. Meanwhile, the Stuart Duke's mansion was a mess. The father screamed at his daughter for ignoring his warnings about Julian despising their mother. That's why he'd always picked plain, modest outfits for the princess. But the stubborn daughter rebelled, wearing a dress just like the late empress's, and begged her father for forgiveness. Diana defended herself, saying guys who lose their mom early on feel a deep ache for her. She pointed out she'd felt that same grief at 17. She added she wanted to help Julian vent all his pent-up emotions. To earn his favor, Diana said she'd use every tool she had to succeed. The man roared, demanding who fed her that nonsense. The girl shot back, "It's not nonsense, I read it in a book." The father laughed bitterly. "You believe in fairy tales, huh?" Then he said seriously, "Human emotions aren't as shallow as you think, daughter. You can't just fix someone by letting them vent. Trust can turn to distrust in a heartbeat." The dad told her to stop being so damn silly and acting like a kid. Reality isn't some fairy tale. He said the Empress's story didn't teach her caution. Today, she's acting like a Neanderthal. The man said his reputation took a hit because of the fight she started in the Imperial Palace over some guest. She said she was just really upset. His Majesty wasn't paying her any attention. Diana added she'd fix everything and do things right if her dad just handed her the Emperor's heart on a plate. He countered, "If mind control was this easy, the whole world would have belonged to witches by now." The girl threw herself at his feet, begging him not to abandon her. She promised she'd stop messing up with the Emperor from now on. She cried she didn't want to go back to those slums. The man said if that's how she felt, she needed to pop out a kid with Julian. Then he could live as regent. But even if Diana fails, he won't ditch her. He'll just kill her. As he left, he decided not to waste faith in his daughter's success. Time to crank up the magic. But lately, magic hasn't been working on the Emperor, probably because of that slave girl hanging around him. The Emperor's assistant, Collins, cheered. "Banquet operation's a success." Catherine said not to jump to conclusions. The red-headed guy called the head maid Mom. He argued the event had a totally different vibe. Just wait till you see the shock on those old aristocrats' faces. The Emperor said it was all Sharn's doing. Not even the pro-imperial faction dared to complain. Colin smirked. From now on, everything changes. No more rumors about His Majesty's issues around women. Catherine added, if any other woman had sat next to the Emperor, no one would have bought it. At first, I seriously doubted that maid could pull it off, she admitted. But with her looks and magic skills, she crushed all expectations. Out of nowhere, His Majesty demanded, who dared strike my personal maid? The head maid didn't answer. She just announced she'd already thrown Princess Stuart's maid in jail. The Emperor asked where she was from. Catherine replied, she's the Baron's heir from the western border, Lord Eaton. Ambitious guy, wants to get involved in central politics. Colin added, look at it any way you want. That Baron worked hard to get to Chancellor. As Catherine lectured her son, the Emperor asked, wasn't that Baron the one we sent troops to help defend the border? Colin nodded. Exactly. And those soldiers, Celtic savages, fought like animals. The Emperor said, now I see why the western border was never breached. Catherine pointed out that it's no surprise Albion agreed to promote Baron Itten's daughter. The assistant asked, so is it really worth getting too rough with her just because of a slap? Julian noted that since his precious maid got beaten up, she lost 2 teeth. Catherine clarified, wasn't her gum split in 2 and started bleeding? Collins remarked it was cleverly done. You could even kill someone from that. A few days later, heavy thuds shook the Itten estate. Dust rose in thick clouds, fences and walls crumbled left and right. The estate owner stormed up to the guard and barked, which fool dared to shoot at us? A flabbergasted guard told his lord the attacker's flag had a white lion. The Baron was just as stunned. Sure enough, the Emperor and his army were already massing at the estate walls. Meanwhile, in the Imperial Palace, Collins groaned at Sharn. Do I really have to carry and deliver this massive crate? She gave him a thumbs up and said thanks for volunteering to help. He pointed out it was the Cerseum Islanders' traditional outfit, then asked, you not gonna keep wearing it? Sharn said her clothes were fine, but palace folks always looked sideways at cultural stuff. She didn't want the Empire to get the wrong idea about Cerseum girls. The head housekeeper had handed her some palace-ready gear. Collins narrowed his eyes and asked, what's in the box, Sharn? The girl said it was the blanket the Emperor used to cover her, but he left at dawn, and she had no idea what to do with it, so she took it to the head maid. Redhead says spring's finally come for the Lord. Sharon blinked, confused, and asked him to explain. Colin said he hadn't seen His Majesty act so nicely and gently in ages. The girl recalled how the Lord used to treat her like trash and muttered their relationship was a mess. She said she couldn't tell which part of the Emperor was real, and the guy beamed. She wanted to learn more about him. He declared he knew the Emperor best. They were childhood buddies, so Sharon could just ask anything about the Lord. No need to hold back. The heroine wondered how the Emperor would flip if his personal maid bonded with his old pal. Meanwhile, the Emperor's army kept wrecking the Baron's estate fences. Old belief said cannon or catapult fire meant the Emperor's personal orders. He punishes traitors, and the Baron assumed the Emperor caught on that he was in cahoots with the Prime Minister. Guard asked if they should counterattack, and the Baron blew a gasket. What nonsense! 3 years ago, no one thought the Emperor was some scaredy cat afraid of the throne and a threat. The Baron knew those battlefield wins weren't just luck. War showed Julian's cleverness, smarts, and all that. Nobles panicked he'd die with no heir. The Emperor locked down the throne, amassing a loyal army of common soldiers, most of them street urchins with no real discipline. At first, the Baron panicked, but then he figured out those cannon blasts were just a warning. The man knew if he stalled any longer, His Majesty would blow a gasket. So he ordered the guards to slam the gates open right then. He greeted the Lord and hailed him as the Empire's shining sun. Suddenly, a woman's anguished cry pierced the air, calling for her father. The Baron looked up and saw his daughter Janice, trembling and begging for her life. He demanded to know why his daughter was in such a mess and locked in a cage. Julian explained there'd been a scene at the banquet. Lady Eaton slapped his personal secretary in the face. The secretary lost 5 teeth and coughed blood for days afterward. The Emperor claimed it broke his heart and said he came here to announce he'd make Lady Eaton pay. Even as the girl insisted it was just a slap, the Baron was gutted by his daughter's betrayal. He blamed himself for trusting that future empress with his daughter, only to have her fall into a viper's jaws. He knew under imperial law his girl could be executed for this. Worse, the gates were already open. The Emperor arrived with his troops, and the Baron hadn't even time to prepare. He'd known nothing. The Prime Minister couldn't have been clueless about the mess his daughter's maid got into. He knew all the Emperor's plans, but didn't warn Mr. Eaton, didn't send him a single message. Could that bastard have decided to ruin little Janice just to get rid of Baron Eaton? All the man could do was kneel before the ruthless monarch and beg for mercy. He begged the Emperor to spare at least his wife and daughter. Julian noted that Baron Eaton probably fathered his daughter at 40. The Emperor added, "Now it's clear why the girl acts so immature. He never got around to explaining everything to her. He said he's a merciful ruler, but this is the last time he's forgiving Baron Eaton." Then he ordered Lady Eaton released and asked what the man planned to do next. Later, Lady Eaton approached Lady Sarah, begging for forgiveness for herself and her family. The main character was shocked to hear that from someone who'd recently called her worse than horse manure. The red-haired girl said she was just going on rumors about what was happening in the palace. Sharpa noted to herself that the emperor must have really clowned the Eaton family to get that aristocrat to bow her head. But it didn't hurt. Janice asked the main character if she was forgiven. When Sharn said yes, the red-haired girl lit up with joy. She thanked them and said what a relief it was. Explained that the emperor himself made the bully apologize to the victim. Seems like he really has a soft spot for his favorite. While the heroine was thinking how dumb she looked lying about her cheek, Lady Eaton says she wants to hear their cute love story. Janice notices Sharn isn't wearing her people's traditional clothes, probably because of her and Princess Stuart. Then she shyly says she'd like to give Sharn a little piece of advice. The heroine didn't even get to respond before being caught off guard, and Janice walks over, whispers in her ear to be careful with Nobby. Viewers are probably wondering what Lady Eaton was even saying, but the author doesn't spill the beans. Instead, he cuts to Julian returning to the palace and giving his maid a serious look. Sharn stutters about being relieved he came back unharmed, then asks why she swapped her outfit. She remembers the emperor specifically told her to wear her people's clothing at the banquet. The heroine says she figured the palace people found her outfit too revealing. The emperor asks if she's uncomfortable in it, and she hesitates before nodding. Julian says if that's the case, she can do what she thinks is right. She offers to bring him medicine, since he didn't take any during his trip. And the emperor nods. Sharn is shocked he said yes so fast, no pushback at all. That's got to make her smile even wider. Then she recalls Janice's line about him liking her, and her grin stretches even more. No wonder Julian started coughing when his personal attendant started thinking so much about him. After that conversation, His Majesty was working in his office. Suddenly, he heard the creak of the door opening and voices apologizing for the interruption. Lifting his head, the emperor saw two dark figures in front of him with a creepy aura. Julian frantically exclaimed, "Who are these strangers, and who gave them permission to barge in?" The dark figures said they brought a surprise, but noticing the Lord's confusion, introduced themselves as Catherine and Colin, and asked if he recognized them. Colin said that on the battlefield, he'd often heard the Emperor miss Catherine's blackberry pie. Julian confirmed it was true, and the subordinates started pushing the Lord to take at least a bite. The Emperor thanked Catherine and agreed. The subordinates watched with smiles as the Lord shoveled piece after piece into his mouth. Suddenly, a woman's scream echoed from the hallway, calling for Colin. She'd caught the stench of poison from the Emperor's study. When Sean, Colin, and Catherine stormed into the Lord's office, it was already too late. The red-haired guy shouted, "What the hell's going on? Who are these people?" Catherine guessed they were just imposters, dressed exactly like the Emperor's servants. The Emperor's aide asked what to do with them now, but the Lord stayed silent. Sharn asked how much His Majesty had eaten by now, but instead of answering, he just collapsed. Sharn's voice reached Juliana. She'd been trying for so long, but it was pointless. The Lord ate too much. She said she'd seen berries like these on her island. Looked like blueberries, but way more dangerous. Looks like the poison's already spread. Need an antidote fast, or the consequences are gonna be terrible. Colin insisted on calling the Emperor's personal doctor, but Catherine reminded him. Those criminals even bribed the guards. She doubted they could find a decent healer anywhere in the palace now. Sharn said she could make the antidote herself. A little later, the heroine was already at a herbal garden an hour's ride from the palace. She asked the garden's owner if there was a plant here with yellow flowers. The man said he knew the plant, but all the harvest was already sent to the palace. You can only find it in those hills over there now. Those hills were way off, but they didn't have a choice. Sharn and Colin headed there. Along the way, the heroine said it was all her fault. Her reckless move made the Prime Minister use magic so openly. The guy said he didn't see it that way. The princess marriage hasn't been announced yet. Sharn asked why Alban wasn't being punished for his magic. Colin replied there were two reasons: lack of evidence and political power. The people pretending to be the Emperor's servants are dead. No key evidence left to prove the crime. Moreover, when Alban served as regent for the young emperor, he built up his power, both inside the palace and beyond. The case won't even reach a death sentence, but His Majesty could face backlash from the nobles. That's why the last banquet was crucial. The Emperor wanted to plant the seeds to turn the aristocrats into a loyal faction. Sharn realized with a pang that the guy wasn't even mad. He'd probably been expecting something like this the whole time. Colin noted they'd climbed high enough without spotting any plants, so Sharn suggested splitting up to search. They'd already spent hours looking. No time to waste. The poison was spreading through the Emperor's body. Sharn silently begged the plant to show up. The poison could start wrecking the Lord's organs. Suddenly, the heroine let out a shout. She started yelling for Colin, cheering that she'd finally found the medicinal plant. The heroine planned to pluck it carefully, making sure not to damage the roots. Just then, a suspicious hiss echoed out. A snake lunged at Sharn. She let out a scream as it attacked out of nowhere. Colin heard, sprinted over, and anxiously asked what was going on. The heroine calmly announced she'd been bitten, but it wasn't a big deal. The snake was harmless. Colin fumed. Did they really have to deal with snakes up here? Then he wondered why she was still holding it. She asked if the guy was hungry, saying they could roast a snake and grab a bite. Colin started yelling that she was spouting nonsense. She asked what's so weird about that. The guy countered, "Do they actually eat snakes back on your island?" Sharn said it was delicious, but there was no time for chatter. We had to head back to the palace. Colin couldn't process it. The Emperor's condition improved. His face looked healthier, more animated. Sharn told the headmaid that if he took the medicine every 2 hours, his condition would definitely improve. Catherine admitted she never imagined Sharn knew so much. Sharn explained that back on her island, she'd dealt in herbs. She added she just followed the advice and went up the hill. "If it wasn't for you," she said, "I don't know what would have happened." The lady pointed out one of the attackers was dressed like the headmaid. That meant she'd become a tool used against the Emperor. Catherine was placed in service to the young ruler because her family was poor and powerless. She had nothing but her own life. The lady said she was incredibly grateful that thanks to Sharn, His Majesty lived to fight another day and could keep standing up to the Chancellor. The woman felt like fate had sent such a gifted girl straight to the palace. Sharn replied that the headmaid was just flattering her. Then she thought it'd be nice if the Emperor thought the same way. Not just Catherine. Sharn declared they needed to focus on the present. Then she added she had no idea what kind of magic the attackers used. She explained that it takes serious magic to take full control of someone's mind in such a short time. The more black magic builds up, the stronger the poison gets. No ordinary person could survive that in their body. Sharn mentioned snakes as an example. They drop dead once they hit their target, succumbing to the poison. Meanwhile, Albont told his daughter magic isn't perfect or easy. Even creating an illusion takes serious effort. He noted the effects stronger if the individuals look like their target, and hiding the poison requires even more caution. The man smirked. Some lowly slave managed to outwit the magic and save the Emperor. Looks like they found a pearl in a pile of manure. The princess said her father shouldn't have weakened the poison. It should have let them die on that hill. The Prime Minister asked Diana if she really couldn't handle a commoner all on her own, without her father's help. He asked if it was the slave's looks or her skills. The princess snapped it had nothing to do with either. Albont noted a sorcerer shouldn't act recklessly. One death in the mountains isn't enough. Julian must feel the full brutality. Meanwhile, the Emperor dreamed of falling endlessly into a dark abyss, his feet never touching the ground. But it didn't feel like a nightmare. Even as he plummeted, Julian sensed the warmth of someone's body near him. When he opened his eyes, the Emperor saw Sharn's worried face beside him. She immediately bombarded him with questions. How he felt, if anything hurt. Then she guessed he was probably hungry and dashed to the kitchen. Julian tried to stop her, of course. Suddenly, the main heroine's shoe flew off her foot. The girl slipped, crashed to the floor. Julian walks over, checks if she's all right, then tells her to slow down. No reaction, not even a flinch. The Emperor leans down, asks if she's okay. Then Sharn blurts out, "Does that mean you're disappointed in me, sir?" Julian raises an eyebrow. "What are you talking about?" She retells Sir Colin's story, the one where the Emperor's had his share of messed up accidents since he was young. Sharn says she felt this crushing sadness and terror, realizing the Emperor could have a major disaster any time. Then realized she fully backs His Majesty. On her side, not because of a contract, but from real loyalty. Julian notices her trembling, asks what's wrong. Sharn says the Emperor wanted a servant to block magic, but the shield cracked and you almost died. Sharn trusted her magic, but couldn't protect the Emperor. She admits she failed her promise. Probably thinks you're disappointed in her. Then the heroine pounces on the Emperor, screaming she'll fix it and never let this happen again. Demands he see how valuable she is and pleads for his trust. Julian scowls, barks at her to get off right now. Suddenly, the heroine freezes. Realizing the awkward position they're in, she jumped back from the Emperor like she'd touched a hot stove, stammering that this wasn't the proof she meant. Julian chuckled and said she didn't mean to deny it so desperately. He hadn't even considered such an outcome. Then, he asked the maid if she really thought her master was some kind of pervert. Julian extended a hand to Sharn, telling her to get up. The floor was cold. The heroine felt relief. She'd really been afraid the Emperor would get angry and yank her out of service. She knew that if she wasn't dismissed, she wouldn't be the only one to suffer. Hachan, who'd signed up as a gladiator, would too. The heroine really wanted to succeed, especially now that the Emperor wasn't looking at her as harshly as their first meeting. He asked what the bandage on Sharn's ankle was about. The girl replied that something interesting had happened in the mountains. Sharn was about to start explaining when, before the Emperor could blink, she collapsed on the floor. The main heroine blinked back into awareness and asked what the hell was going on. Catherine said it was finally happening. Sharn was sick. Seeing the confusion on her master's face, the head maid noted that dark magic had been used 2 days ago to disguise the unknown attackers as the Emperor's trusted servants. Then, a pile pie laced with toxic berries was baked and presented to His Majesty. He nearly died, but Sharn found some herbs that helped detoxify the poison. Catherine said her personal maid spent the whole day making the medicine and didn't sleep a single night taking care of you, Master. Then the head maid pointed out that the girl was hurt. Her ankle looked like a mess. The Emperor ordered Catherine to bring a painkiller and some healing ointment. When the head maid ran off to get it, the Emperor couldn't help but notice the irony. After all, the woman who called herself his mother abandoned little Julian and fled in fear of the Prime Minister. Yet here was a lowly maid, with nothing but her own life, standing up for the Emperor and saving it. He just couldn't figure out why she was apologizing to him. Why had she thrown herself into action, ignoring the damage to her own body? Julian figured Sharn was going out of her mind with worry over him. Suddenly, Colin burst in, shouting that Sharn had been bitten by a snake in the mountains. But he didn't grasp the full danger. Sharn felt fine and hadn't even fainted. Colin checked her injured leg and muttered, "Phew, it's just a viper bite. Not too bad." Suddenly, the Emperor shoved Colin's hand aside. His Majesty said any careless touch could make Sharn's condition worse. Colin replied, "Hygiene is important, and all the decisions His Majesty made were spot on." The Emperor asked, "Why's the assistant suddenly bringing this up?" He explained, "I meant the Emperor's choice to keep giving Sharn a chance. That's the point." The guy pointed out that even though she was just a regular slave, her words didn't ring true. But the Lord showed mercy, didn't kill her. Instead, he gave her freedom from those old chains and a shot to prove herself. Colin said, "Those were the Emperor's best calls. Sharn's giving it her all." The Emperor said, "We all got lucky she ended up in the palace, but luck needs some caution." As for Sharn, the Emperor's clear thinking's been swept downstream. Julian figured his brain's totally useless here. The Emperor slathered ointment on her leg and bandaged it up himself. He figured that's enough, but Sharn's not coming around anytime soon. Julian called the servant's name a few times, begging her to snap out of it. Suddenly, the heroine cracked her eyes open, but everything she saw was still a blur. So I didn't hesitate to call the Emperor sitting by the bed, Pachan, and mumbled that I really missed him. She said he was the only one she had, and asked Pachan if he thought they could go back to the amazing Cerseum Island together. The Emperor wasn't the least bit offended or angry. She was just talking in her fever. Longing for home is natural, but Sharn was enslaved at 17 and put through brutal conditions until she got to the palace at 20. Julian figured Sharn and Pachan could make it back to the island free and whole. But what then? The same poor dreary life they always had. Julian started thinking maybe it'd be smarter to set up shop in the Empire and protect his own interests, and enjoy the kind of luxury that's definitely not on some island. He tried to tell himself it was just regular dream chatter, nothing big, but those restless thoughts just wouldn't let him rest. He silently begged Sharn to stop blabbing about her secret wishes so loudly, because there are people who envy folks who can dream that desperately. A few days passed, and everything went back to normal. But something changed. The head maid now controls everything that goes into the Emperor's mouth. In that moment, the girl realized her magic wasn't as strong as the Chancellor's. Just confidence and desire aren't enough to properly protect the Emperor. Sharn knew, even if she improved her spells, it might not be enough to stand up to Albunt in the future. She had no idea what to do next, so she mentally reached out to Pachan, asking for help. While walking down the corridor, she asked the head maid if she could attend the gladiator training now. Catherine asked, with clear annoyance, if she really wanted to meet Pachan, that slave. Sharn figured Catherine would probably say no, given the tense situation. But the woman said she could go after tea, provided she first got the Emperor's permission. Sharn had just opened her mouth to thank the head maid when Lady Stuart suddenly showed up. She said she'd heard the Emperor wasn't feeling well and decided to pay him a visit. Catherine greeted Princess Diana and said she'd escort her to the audience chamber. Sharn noted that Lady Stuart's appearance was worlds apart from the banquet. She looked composed and dignified now, like a real empress. The princess greeted the wisest ruler and the son of this empire. Julian said he really appreciates the young lady taking the time to visit him. Then he said tea's all set. Diana noted she was super worried when she heard the Emperor got sick. Hopes he's fully healed now. Julian replied, "Looks like everything's fine now. There was a minor incident, but we sorted it out long ago." Diana seethed inwardly. How could the Emperor casually call this a minor incident? The palace had gone totally chaotic when His Majesty ate a poisoned pastry, but now Julian looked normal, so Diana could breathe easy. Still, who'd try to kill the Emperor before his wedding? The girl was wondering, did the ruler actually sense the magic? Could that Cerseum Island slave even pull off a trick like that? Well, seems like things aren't going exactly as her dad planned. Sharn apologized and said she needs to take her leave. Julian said it's fine. Sharn's free to go. But the princess didn't miss a beat, already stepping in to chat with the girl as she left. Diana asked again for her name, said she'd forgotten, and apologized for her maid's rude behavior at the banquet. Then asked, "Since you're basically sharing a husband, why not try to get along like family?" The girl was already reeling, but the next words flat out wrecked her. Diana pointed out the big question now is, who'll pop out the imperial heir first? She figured she was just the prince's handmaiden and would be thrilled if someone truly loved him. Plus, it meant Sharoon could wrap up his duty and head back to Pachan's home island with him. Julian sighed, wondering if Sharoon would leave him too. He knew the sting of rejection all too well. Once, they told little Julian to live in hatred toward her, to use that hatred to push through life's struggles, because he'd be the emperor, and she'd be free. He remembered how she never shed a tear till the very end. Julian tried to hold back too. His eyes burned, but he kept wondering if it'd be better if he'd just broken down and clung to her. Maybe. All his bottled-up tears had turned into fear, gnawing at the emperor forever. Same deal now. Julian snapped back to reality when Princess Diana asked if he was feeling unwell again. She asked if His Majesty was feeling unwell again. He said everything was fine, just thinking about nonsense. Staring at him, Diana silently wondered if anyone could actually be this beautiful in real life. He's like a thorned rose, impossible to get close, untouchable and closed off to everyone. But someone actually managed to get the emperor's attention. She's Sharn, born among slaves on Cerseum Island, his mistress. When that island girl left, Diana noticed the emperor's eyes darken with anger. It was a deep, raw emotion. After that look, Diana made up her mind. She'd win His Majesty's heart no matter what. Funny, would it have been easier if she, a silly girl, had just been swept off her feet by Julian's charm? But on the other hand, her heart wasn't ready to fall in love. Plus, men like him can't make a woman happy. Diana decided she'd just take whatever advantage she could get. She had an idea, a love potion to make the target fall for her. It's a shot in the dark, but worth a try. If Diana finally becomes empress and bears an heir, her life will change forever. The princess smiled and told the emperor she'd prepared something special for him. Julian had no clue what it was. She'd heard that sleeping next to an aphrodisiac lets it soak up your scent, making it more effective. So she spent a few nights doing that, but still worried. Would the potion work on a man so obsessed with another woman? Suddenly, the emperor jumped up and headed somewhere. The princess tried to stop him, but got only apologies from the emperor. He explained he had to leave urgently to finish unfinished business. He wished the princess a safe return home. At the same time, cheerful Sharn ran to meet Pachan. She threw herself into his arms and declared she'd missed him like crazy. The guy asked how Sharn was doing. She replied it was obvious since she served in the imperial palace. She added the headmaid looked after her too. Pachan listened to Sharn's story with sadness, convinced she was faking it. She even looked skinnier than when she was a slave. He knew that while his friend claimed everything was fine, deep down she was fighting hard for a lot. Suddenly, Pachan, in a serious tone, asked the girl to wait a bit until he trained hard and beat the competition. She objected. No way, especially if Pachan got hurt in battle. He said he might look weak to her. But what she saw wasn't the whole story. Sharn could count on him, because if a gladiator defeated an opponent in the arena, they had the right to demand an audience with their master. Pachan said a gladiator could ask that lord for anything, and they had to comply, so the girl just needed to wait. The guy promised he'd win for sure, so they could return to Cerseum Island together. Sharn agreed. It was already dark when Pachan returned to the training grounds. He noticed everyone was tenser than usual, and decided to ask what was going on. They told him to look up, and Pachan saw His Majesty sitting on the throne atop the pedestal. The guy bowed and greeted the supreme ruler and the empire's shining sun. Julian stepped down calmly from the pedestal and asked the gladiator if his name was really Pachan. The emperor noted he'd heard the boy had decent skills for a slave brought over from an island. Julian offered the terrified kid a chance to show off his gladiator skills, face off on the arena, and fight. After a while, the gladiator stood across from the emperor, gripping a sword with trembling hands. Naturally, Pachan had no choice but to say it was an honor, and he'd give it his all. But the emperor said whether it was an honor would only be known after the battle ended, and the battle would only end when one of them was defeated, and defeat meant death. When the blades clashed, Pachan thought this was a wild but not terrible chance. If he pulled this off, he could go home with Sharn. All of Pachan's hopes crumbled when it turned out the emperor was a master with a sword. Everyone gaped as the emperor's blade flashed inches from the gladiator's face. Julian dropped the kid with a flurry of fast strikes. Clearly, Julian got carried away, snarling it'd be a glorious death for a slave. Suddenly, someone grabbed his wrist. Turns out it was Collins, who laughed it off and suggested wrapping up the training and heading home. The royal aide took one look at the wounded Pachan and suddenly got why the master was so angry. But killing a useless slave won't change a thing. Suddenly, the emperor called out to Collins, asking if that slave should take on Marcus. The redhead figured the master was kidding. Marcus was the empire's toughest gladiator. He'd won 20 battles, killed 18 opponents, and left the other 2 permanently crippled. The emperor gave a sly grin and said he was just teasing. Offered it because that slave had guts. Suddenly, Julian caught the wounded gladiator's shout. Couldn't just quit. He was begging the master for one more shot. He'd do anything to win that fight. His Highness told the slave to remember his place. Pachan hesitated, then muttered that he really could do it. The emperor smirked and said, If the slave was so sure of himself, let him take down all the gladiators here first. As they headed back to the castle, Julian wondered what made Pachan so pitiful. Why was he doing this? Why push so hard in battle? Why beg so desperately for another shot? Could it be because Sharn met him behind the Lord's back? Could it be she really likes him that much? Julian told himself not to think of the girl as anything other than a simple servant, the one who uses magic every night to help His Majesty sleep. Because he can't do it on his own, there's nothing between him and the girl but a contract. No more, no less. Suddenly, Julian was yanked from his thoughts by the assistant's question. Does the Lord like Sharn? The Emperor didn't even believe it at first and asked for clarification. Colin noted he knows the Lord doesn't fall for people easily. He added he's asking because right now, His Majesty's acting like he's got feelings for the servant. The Emperor told him to think before he speaks. The guy noted there's no reason to be so rough with the gladiator. The Emperor probably got angry at Pachan because there's something going on between him and Sharn. He told him to stop overcomplicating things and not be afraid to call it what it is. Plain old jealousy. Julian replied, the Empire's son can't feel for someone like a commoner. He should just take what he wants without getting attached. It'd be ridiculous if the supreme ruler fell for some woman's heart. Just as His Majesty tried to explain it was a misunderstanding, Sharn showed up and greeted the Emperor with a cheerful smile. She said she'd help the Lord and took his sword. When the servant touched him, Julian's heart raced and his cheeks flushed. She realized the sword was way heavier than it looked. Then she asked, "Why is it all bloodstained? Did you actually send another warhorse this time?" The Emperor didn't get it at first, then figured it out and asked, "What if it's not horse blood? What if it's human?" She smirked. "That's not possible. We're not on a battlefield. Besides, the Emperor's not the reckless type with a blade in hand." He wondered, does the maid actually think I'm a good guy? Curious how she'll react when she finds out the blood's Pachan's, Julian thought to himself. Sharon knows absolutely nothing about him, has no clue what he's willing to do to get what he wants. She doesn't get that Emperor Julian doesn't need feelings for something he wants. He takes it. The Emperor stepped up to her and asked, "How long do you think I can keep pretending to be a good guy around you?" Sharon lay in bed, going over the Emperor's words again. He's not a good man. Doesn't plan on pretending to be either. He wondered, does this mean the girl's stuck on his side forever? Serving no one but him? Also, there was another thing bugging the main character. It happened a few days ago, when she brought the Lord some red thread, saying she got it just to tie around his ankle. The Emperor eyed the spool of thread like it was a joke. Does she think this thing's strong enough? He felt the thread might snap under the strain. Sharon smiled and said even if that happened, they'd just grab another thread. But Sharon caught the Emperor's face darken instantly and asked, "What's wrong?" Instead of answering, the Emperor tossed the spool aside and grabbed Sharon by the throat. Sharon begged him to stop, but he stood his ground. Her tears slid down his hand, but he only squeezed harder. Suddenly, he seemed to snap out of it and released her with wide, stunned eyes. He asked, What just happened?" Sharon realized he wasn't faking. It was genuine confusion, like he'd just woken from a deep sleep. No wonder he was on edge. He'd recently survived an attack in his own palace. The attackers were disguised as people he trusted completely. Meanwhile, Lady Stuart stepped out of the palace for a stroll under the starry sky, wondering how the Emperor could just walk out. Why be so harsh if he wasn't even interested? Her father once told her he didn't get how a woman could be born and not know how to catch a man's eye. A real beauty only needs a smile and a glance. So what can a daughter do? Diana sadly realized she wasn't born a real beauty and doesn't have that gift. What's left for her? She couldn't even get the Emperor to take that damn potion. Then the princess heard some weird shouts. Sounded like a fight. Who in their right mind trains this late? All the Imperial Knights should have been prepping for bed. Peeking around the corner, Diana spotted the Imperial gladiator, Pachan. He noticed Lady Diana and asked if she was lost. Diana said she'd gone out for tea during her walk and somehow ended up here. She lied. There was actually alcohol in the cup, but Pachan already introduced himself and his position. She joked about his weird name and his exotic face. The gladiator offered to walk Miss to the inner palace garden. As soon as Diana agreed, bushes rustled nearby. He pushed the lady aside and told her to wait while he checked it out. A pup or kitten burst out of the shrubs. "That's Nabby, my cat," Diana said. "Grandpa sent him. He can't leave his lazy granddaughter alone. Naturally, he won't take his eyes off her." Pachan said he instantly thought, well, obviously the cat was just following its owner, since it had a gold collar. The girl reacted nicely to the guy's words, probably because she had a drink or two and was feeling a bit tipsy. She felt awkward and shot him a playful glance, but then she suddenly screamed loud enough to crack the room, spotting blood on the gladiator's neck. She asked if he was really hurt. Pachan said it was just a tiny cut from training. Diana got so flustered, she handed him her handkerchief to wipe the bleeding wound. Of course, she felt a twinge of sadness for a second. The handkerchief was supposed to go to Julian, but he probably didn't even notice a girl like her. Diana was all whatever about the whole magic thing. She didn't think a love potion could ever work. Now, though, she was totally sure it was dumb. Pachan thanked the princess for the handkerchief and said he didn't even know how to start paying her back. The girl said, "Don't worry about it. It's not like you owe me anything," because the guy's face reminded her of a puppy. Plus, Diana was happy to help out her guy, who tagged along on that late-night stroll. Later, in the Imperial War Room, the Emperor called a meeting with his top nobles. Lord Alban raised an eyebrow and asked, "How's His Majesty feeling now that he's all healed up?" The old man had nearly lost his mind when he heard the young emperor wasn't well. Julian just smiled, meeting the Chancellor's bold gaze. He said not to worry, it's just a low, sneaky trick from a backstabber. The Chancellor found the Emperor's choice of words amusing, but didn't sound right to him. The man reminded Julian he'd been drilled since childhood to watch what he says and does. Every other parliament member cowered in fear, sitting as quiet as mice. Alban figured the Emperor had gotten a bit braver, but that didn't mean they could push him around. He suggested a hunting competition. His estate's grounds are perfect for it. The Prime Minister added, this was just to celebrate the Emperor's recovery. Julian said, "Sounds fun, but I won't be joining. Organizing such an event and handling all the people would be a huge hassle." Without even mentioning the budget, the Chancellor laughed it off. "Don't sweat it," he said. After all, if he's running the show, he'd make sure nothing went wrong. Then he apologized and said he had urgent business to leave for. Colin asked, "A hunting tournament on the Chancellor's land? That's shady, right?" The Emperor explained, "It's obvious Alban wants to show the elite he's more competent than me. But Alban isn't about to let me off the hook that easily. Seems like he's decided the Emperor's plate is his personal kitchen lab for culinary experiments." Julian suggested breaking the Chancellor's spine to drive home the point that helping yourself to someone else's food without asking is bad form. Collins pointed out that the Chancellor's lands are basically enemy territory. Who knows what kind of threats could be lurking there? To top it all off, the Chancellor has a terrifying private army. The Emperor asked if there wasn't a safer, more efficient method. The assistant had a brilliant idea. "Maybe this time, Your Majesty could actually put his good looks to use?" The Emperor didn't get it at first, but the assistant explained that now was the perfect time to make the most of His Majesty's face. After all, seducing Lady Dana Stewart and pulling her to His Majesty's side would be a solid strategy. The Emperor bristled. Why should he let Alban use such underhanded tactics if he wanted to play that game? Over the years, Alban had sent all sorts of spies, including dazzling beauties. None of them had ever won the Emperor's favor. Collins had underestimated the heart of a heartless lord before, but things were different now. The redhead added that Lady Stewart would definitely become Empress, but what happened next was up to the Emperor. Julian asked what the assistant meant. Collins recommended the Lord see it as a strategy to hold on to the throne. He reminded His Majesty that he'd sworn to live only as an emperor, not as a regular man. Julian agreed. He'd made a vow to erase anything from his heart that didn't lead to the throne. The Emperor thought if he went through with it, he could do whatever he wanted with the Chancellor's daughter. Collins' right. What matters is having it without getting attached. But come on, is that really so easy? Julian realized he was just a little lost. Never felt anything like this before. It'll blow over soon enough. For an emperor, emotions are a deadly weakness. Better to crush them before they take root. A little while later, something juicy was brewing in the Imperial Palace. Lady Stewart thanked His Majesty for the invite. The Emperor greeted his guest with a smile and waved her to the table. She admitted she'd given it some thought and realized her words came off as pretty harsh last time. The Emperor asked her to clarify what happened last time. The princess shot back. "Don't tell me you've forgotten." She reminded him she'd shown up unannounced, interrupting his work without a care in the world. His Majesty apologized for cutting the conversation short. It was rude as hell. Diana felt her chest tighten. Talking to Julian was just as hard as talking to her dad. She decided to steer the conversation and mentioned her dad's been training his ass off for the hunting tournament. The Emperor said he was looking forward to it. Just then, Sharn showed up. The princess blinked. Had Julian actually invited this girl to lunch? Sharn said she'd brought wine, hoped the princess would enjoy it, then quietly slipped away. She watched them chatting away, clearly lost in their own little world. Diana stopped Sharn and asked if she was really just gonna leave, then suggested staying for at least one toast. The heroine was shocked and said she appreciated the offer, but doesn't drink. The princess insisted she sit down. The Emperor added, "Turning down a senior's good intentions is rude." Sharn had to agree. The princess smiled and told Sharn they were on the same page about this. She confessed that a noble should know their wines. But alas, her taste buds stubbornly refused to cooperate. Julian said this wine's meant for lunch, so it's not too strong. Lady Diana'll be fine. The heroine thought the Emperor had such a gentle voice. She didn't even know he could talk like that. The princess asked, "Since His Majesty's being so kind about it, how can I say no?" The Emperor and the daughter of the Stuart noble family are a perfect match. Sharn finally got it. She realized her true status and remembered she's just a common slave. The whole court already knows His Majesty's madness has calmed down. So once this political marriage goes through without a hitch, the heroine will finally be able to leave the palace. But does Sharn really have to keep pretending to bask in His Majesty's favor even now? The girl noted the Emperor and Princess made a harmonious pair. Diana thanked her. She noted to herself that it's all fake. They're just drinking and laughing together. The princess asked if Sharon thought there was someone who fits her better. After that question, the Emperor locked his gaze on the maid, watching her reaction closely. Our heroine blushed. Julian scrunched his face and muttered that the meat, while tasty, was tough. Diana caught Sharon's sour reaction and quickly shifted the topic. Diana was stressing. She needed to ride for the tournament, but was totally new to it. The Emperor offered the princess a spot at the tournament. She hesitated, recalling Sharon's earlier reaction. After a beat, Diana nodded, smirking. An island girl probably gets along with horses. The heroine had no choice but to agree, even though she'd only worked in stables and never rode as a slave. Those memories left her bitter. She suddenly craved a drink. Of course, the princess and emperor caught on immediately. The main character was shocked by the pleasant taste, suddenly getting why people love alcohol. Sharon happily licked his lips. Julian was stunned. He smirked, noting her wide-eyed shock. But then I asked myself why you're getting so worked up over Sharn if she's just a personal servant. The emperor realized, despite her being under his roof, he was staring at her like she was some priceless treasure. Diana caught that look and thought how sweet it was. He's burning up, and she's not even glancing his way. Her feelings for him can't measure up to his obsession. Diana figured to earn the Empress title, she'd have to steer clear of conflicts, especially with Sharn. It could be risky. Sharn apologized for her behavior, vowed not to touch another drop of alcohol. But she jokingly pointed out the Emperor himself offered the wine, so everyone has to obey and take a sip. Her pitiful life dragged her down. She thought a glass of wine might help, even for a second. She apologized and hurried off, clearly flustered and upset about the whole thing. The Emperor couldn't help but glance after the departing servant. After dinner, Julian kept thinking about how he felt toward Sharn. He inwardly noted the mess of shame in his heart. He called himself a fool, tried to forget Sharn for ages, but her thoughts won't quit. Julian bitingly joked to himself he'd probably be up all night again. He wondered where the hell his personal servant was when he needed her most. Suddenly, Catherine pops in, surprised to see His Majesty already back. He asks the head maid where Sharn is, glancing around anxiously. The lady notes Sharn had dinner with the Emperor. She adds she just cleaned and checked every room, but Sharn's nowhere to be found. The Emperor says the maid's right, explaining Sharn had too much wine and probably went to get some fresh air. Catherine points out Sharn never just vanishes, especially when the master needs his insomnia meds. The Emperor's in despair, wondering how his thoughts and dreams are completely under someone else's control. His Majesty covers for the maid's search, even as Catherine tries to push back. He says she's probably in the garden, no need to worry. But even after getting back and changing, Julian can't shake the anxious thoughts about Sharn. Despite the late hour, he leaves his chambers and heads out. Guards try to stop him, but he orders them to stand down and not ask questions. Julian's chest tightens, his heart races. He tries to stay calm despite the anxiety gnawing at him. He suddenly realizes where Sharn went. She's heading straight for that slave. The Emperor's stuck on Diana's question. Does Sharn think there's someone more suitable for her? Yeah, right. Ridiculous that some slaves got the Emperor so worked up. It hit Julian like a ton of bricks. Sharn was actually betraying her own master. This was the third time she'd vanished without a trace, ignoring her duties. While walking past the stables, His Majesty spotted light spilling out from inside. He peeked inside and found Sharn curled up on a pile of hay, fast asleep. He wondered if she'd gotten so drunk she passed out. But that wasn't like her at all. Julian was floored, speechless, but he still carried her back into the palace. The guy reminded himself he'd sworn off feelings for his personal maid for good. He knew if he brought her back now, he'd never get her out of his head. He traced a finger along her cheek and silently asked himself what the heck he was supposed to do with his subordinate. It was getting dark. As usual, Princess Diana hit the evening stroll after dinner. She was already scheming to take over the empire, studying her father's and the emperor's weaknesses. Ideally, she'd pop out a prince who'd eventually outlive everyone else, leaving her the sole heir to the empire. But making that plan work required those two. But the emperor was blind to his affection for another girl, and the prime minister was unpredictable, driven by greed. Diana was stuck. She just couldn't figure out how to take over the country. She figured she'd have to put up with these two for now to get where she's going. But the princess was a cold pragmatist, ready to cut them loose if they turned into a threat later. The moon rose high and lit up the sky. Diana thought moonlit nights were made for getting wasted. Too bad she bottled it up and played it cool. Better to be totally wasted than fake it. Her Highness shooed her maid away. She wanted some alone time. Something snagged her attention out of nowhere. Polished stones gleamed on the ground. The whole thing felt off, way too staged. Could be a marker or a trap. But then Diana remembered her recent run-in with Pac-Man. You just happened to get lost on your walk? So the princess realized he planted the marker thinking she'd get lost again? She caught a sound out of nowhere. Meanwhile, at the Imperial Palace, they were on high alert for the main character. Colin was muttering he was beat and couldn't figure out why the Emperor suddenly went all out looking for Sharon. Total head scratcher. Her behavior made Colin smirk. Mom was playing cool, but deep down, she was totally freaking out. She told him not to stop looking and to keep the guards ready, because Sharon is key to the Emperor getting any peace. Colin wondered if His Majesty had finally made up his mind, and Catherine asked what he meant by that. The guy replied that she already knew how things stood. The headmaid caught on that the son was hinting at the bond between the Emperor and his personal servant, the one everyone senses but no one dares name. Madame went on a rampage, yelling at her son and denying it all, calling their whole thing a performance. Julian's got a freaking obsession. Books, dueling, anything. He chases it to the bitter end. Bottom line, that soft look hides a heart of ice. He's ruthless when he wants to be. He doesn't play the nice guy card. To Julian, love's about control, not care. And Sharon? She might be his next fix. Catherine said that's why she's trying to cut this off before the master completely loses it. Sharon's got that fire in her. She fights for her independence, even if it costs her. She's a little fish. Try to catch her, and she'll slip right through your fingers. Catherine told Colin his job was to make sure the Emperor never fully faces his feelings. Let him think it was just a bad dream. Colin's brain short-circuited. Was this piece the price of lying to save someone? And who's the real winner here? Colin ranted about how nuts this all was. He knew they were asking him to kill the Emperor's emotions in the name of the Empire. The Imperial aide figured Sharon, being a former slave, might have ducked into some shadowy hole no one can reach. Suddenly, he heard a noise. Listening closely, Colin realized it was laughter coming from around the corner. When the guy peeked around the corner, his breath caught in his throat. He saw Pecan and Princess Diana flirting. Colin watched in surprise at their secret meeting, wondering why the heck they were out here strolling under the moon together. And to make things worse, Pecan is the guy Sharon likes. But judging by his expression and body language, he didn't seem the least bit scared of Princess Diana. Colin muttered irritably, "Great! Just when we need him, the king isn't anywhere to be found." Meanwhile, the Emperor was busy with something important. He couldn't admit he needed Sharon not as a cure, but as a lover, so he hides behind paperwork. Sharon's contract stays in effect until his insomnia is cured, and he ties the knot. That's why Sharon can't just be let go, no matter her status or feelings. Keeping Sharon close is also a political move. Albert's a threat to the throne. Until Albert's neutralized, the Emperor needs Sharon. Julian decided to turn around and leave. The Emperor's promise had to be kept, but before a minute had passed, he was running back in a panic. As a true gentleman, the Emperor can't just leave a drunk woman alone. That's what scum do. Julian kept telling himself he'd just keep an eye on the girl till sunrise, then slip back like nothing ever happened. Sharon was kicking herself, probably lost her mind, passing out drunk in the stables. The second she thought about the headmaid finding out, she was toast. A scowling Sharon stood over her, the girl pale with terror. She announced tomorrow's hunting competition in Rivers. Had to get everything ready in advance. Plus, make sure His Majesty's not inconvenienced. And the heroine vowed, no more alcohol starting today. Later, Sharon showed up at the Emperor's chambers, apologizing with her eyes downcast. She said she couldn't remember getting back last night. Should have woken up sooner to prep breakfast. The Emperor coldly noted that even a little too much dinner wine could cloud a person's judgment. Sharon's nerves were showing. Her trembling fingers gave her away. The Emperor leaned in, all superiority, watching her blush. She meekly suggested dropping out of the hunt. Didn't want to hold His Majesty or the princess back. Julian barely caught what she was saying. She clarified, just wanted them to get along. His Majesty told the maid to stop imagining things and stick to her duties. Told her not to meddle, to know her place. Servants don't get involved with the future empress. The hunting tournament day has finally arrived. The guests murmured in outrage. Where the hell had the monarch's beloved vanished? They were asking in shock, had the Emperor finally picked Diana? Others muttered, you can't read a tyrant's mind. Julian's eyes went wide, and the other aristocrats couldn't tear their gazes away either. Everyone's eyes locked onto the stunning Sharon. Gossips whispered again. Was she the one the Emperor's been eyeing? They weren't wrong about the court gossiping over her looks, but now they were wondering who the guy beside her was. The aristocrats present were stunned they were riding together. Watching this, Diana darkly wondered what game they were playing. Before leaving, Collins told the Emperor he'd handle the Lord's duties today, so he had nothing to worry about. Julian nodded and told him he trusted the kid, but now he regretted his choice, sighing bitterly. Sharon and Collins just looked even better together than he'd imagined. It looked like the royal wedding had already happened. Sharon suddenly gasped in shock, because the headmaid was riding past, looking absolutely stunning. Catherine sighed. Too bad women can't be knights. I'd totally nail it. Colin grinned at his mom. Bet you can't beat me to the river on horseback. He missed their races, but Catherine scoffed. Cutting your losses now? I'm winning either way. The guy asked if the emperor would race. The emperor narrowed his eyes. You think I climbed to the throne just for fun? Catherine called dibs, riding first. Colin shot back. If my mom was a knight, she'd be twice the hero Jalek ever was. Sharn frowned. You mean the knight who cursed the royal family? Colin nodded. Yep, she got framed for witchcraft. Her name's been cleared. History set her straight. Sharn's voice dropped. They killed her even after everything she did for this country? The main heroine frowned. Why's Colin so chill about this? The heroine shouted, Colin, pick up the pace or you'll finish dead last. Colin smirked. When someone you care about pulls ahead, that's one thing. But it kills you when they vanish without a trace. Sharn pressed. You mean something else? Colin shrugged. Nah, just saying Mom will beat us all to the river. Colin muttered. The king's been checking his back every step. The girl nodded. He's been off lately, Colin asked. What's he doing that's so weird? The girl said the emperor's been way colder to her lately. Sharon paused, wondering if she'd messed up, and that's why His Majesty was so distant now. She figured there might be another issue she didn't know about, but was ready to do whatever it took to fix it. Colin shrugged it off, saying the emperor's always been a cold fish. Sharon countered, This isn't normal. The emperor barely wants me near him now. She muttered that this high-pressure job was really draining. Better to shovel manure than walk on eggshells every day. Meanwhile, the story shifts to the Chancellor's estate. A mouse scurried toward the tree stump. Then rustling erupted in the bushes. A cat leapt from the bushes. Its jaws clamped down on the tiny, helpless creature in a flash. Now, it's up to viewers to guess what the author's trying to say, and if this is some kind of metaphor. Finally, all the guests arrived at the hunting tournament and settled into their tents. As expected, Colin and Sharon showed up last. He said he had to visit His Majesty first. He asked what Sharon planned to do, but she said she'd just chill in the shade for now. Colin promised to catch up later. Then the girl headed toward the trees, only to stumble into Princess Diana. Diana gushed excitedly about finally seeing Sharn here, but the princess was flustered and clearly not happy about the reunion. The princess said she just wanted to chat with her ladies-in-waiting. Sharn wasn't someone she actually wanted to see, but she had no choice. Meanwhile, Colin asked the emperor, Aren't you curious why Sharn's assistant was running late? Julian smirked and raised an eyebrow. I'm well aware of the assistant's writing skills, the guy replied. It's not just that. We got into a pretty interesting conversation with the girl on the way. He grumbled. You don't even care what we discussed? His Majesty shot back. I don't want to know anything about it. Colin kept going on about how great he and Sharn got along. The red-haired guy finally caught on when Julian, clearly annoyed, grabbed his sword. He said he needed to go visit his new friend. But as he stepped out of the imperial tent, he ran into Albert and the secretary. Man, what a shock. Chancellor Albert showing up here can't be good, but His Majesty's keeping a straight face. Colin was second-guessing if trusting his instincts was a mistake when he had Lady Stuart right in front of him. But it's not his fight. Not long ago, Julian thought Dana was just as hot as Albert. But now, even if it stunk, he'd accepted the truth and his lot. The crown's always a heavy load after all. Either way, everything worked out. No sparks between Sharn and the Emperor, and there never would be. Now, each of them would take their assigned fates and stick to their roles. Someone mentioned this is a great chance to check out the Chancellor's residence. They say it was built by a famous architect from the Florence Empire, called a true masterpiece. Albert chuckled and assured everyone, Nothing special, just saw a cozy farm in Florines and figured I'd build something similar. Julian smirked, silently noting the audacity of calling a luxury mansion built on the people's taxes a farm. The monarch was stunned by Albert's fake humility. He just wanted to flex for the nobles. To show off Walden's chancellor's power, his wealth outstrips the imperial families. To a seasoned politician like him, the young emperor's just a kid. Julian smirked, saying he was curious to see the chancellor's grand palace too. Then he added, almost forgot to call the palace a farm. Albert forced a smile, insisting, It's really just a humble farm, not fit for an emperor to see. Julian replied sarcastically, What a shame. Mentally labeling the chancellor a greedy old man. The cat leaped from the chancellor's lap to go explore and hunt. By the way, no one had noticed yet the blood smeared on the cat's collar. Meanwhile, the ladies had a tea party, chatting about the emperor's unusually kind treatment of Lady Stuart today. Diana blushed and fidgeted. If it was that obvious, I'm actually kind of embarrassed now. Sharn caught a sweet floral scent, like she was deep in a forest clearing. It tugged her back to her home island of Cerseum, where the princess approached and asked if she liked the tea. She explained it was one of the Empire's signature blends. Diana joked that unlike wine, tea's hot, so Sharn shouldn't guzzle it all at once. Sharn thanked the princess, then caught the maid's sneering, restrained giggles. One maid apologized, like how if you're from Cerseum, it makes sense you don't know basic etiquette. Her friend told Sharn to ditch the fashion shopping and learn some manners. Flashing your body won't charm guys forever. The princess's maids were tearing her down, and Sharn was furious and stunned. So the princess never cared. She just wanted to humiliate her. But between the Emperor and the island girl, nothing's going on. Yet Lady Stuart's still mad. A girl who shines only on the surface can't fix the Emperor's broken heart or connect with him deeply. Had she messed up? Had her mistake made the Emperor so cold lately? The blonde said she didn't expect the imperial favorite and the princess's roles to switch so fast. She added that the princess had captured the Emperor's interest, hence why true nature matters. The princess smiled, saying she was shocked the Emperor opened up to her so quickly. One of the ladies in waiting mentioned that the Emperor finally caught on to Lady Stuart's inner beauty. Suddenly, someone asked Sharon if she was actually hurt by it. The princess guessed the words might have come off as a bit sharp to her. She asked her not to take it too personally. One lady summed it up. It's a sad spot to be in when you've got nothing and you're just grasping at someone who's already gone. That really set the main character off, and that's when it hit her. This whole tea party was planned to laugh at her. She realized she'd been duped by Diana, agreeing to chat. It was just like that dinner. Out of nowhere, the head maid showed up with a tray of sweets and cheerfully announced she was thrilled the aristocrats had accepted Sharon into their circle. She added it was a joy to watch the ladies get along. Everyone seems fond of the girl, Lady Eaton being the obvious exception. The princess snorted, unimpressed. Since when does the head maid care so much about Sharon? Catherine replied that on the day of that strange dinner, she figured something out. The Empire's sun only shines in one place. Diana caught on to what the maid meant and didn't like it one bit. Bet viewers are wondering what that line really meant. The woman admitted Sharon did have a lot to drink that night, went out to the garden for some air, but came back way past midnight. She said the Emperor was so worried about Lady Sharn, he searched all night to bring her back to the palace. For some reason, Diana smirked and concluded, well, that's what happened back then. Catherine thought, honestly, she didn't know where Sharn had been that night or what she was up to. But just before dawn, she ran into the Emperor. Looked like he hadn't slept a wink. She asked where His Majesty had been all night. Sleepless again? Catherine said Sharn hadn't returned yet. But the Lord replied, no need to look for her. The woman was stunned. The Emperor told her, when Sharn comes back, just act like nothing happened. As the Emperor passed by, the head maid noticed straw falling off him. She wondered, had the Lord been in the stables all night? At the mention of stables, Catherine's mind immediately jumped to Sharn. Princess Diana laughed. You were worrying for nothing. But Catherine replied, no, it wasn't. That girl from the island's heart's too good to be guilty. Lady Stuart fumed. Didn't expect it to turn out this way at all. The princess's friends were stunned by the head maid's words. One whispered, so Princess Diana's been totally humiliated. With fake regret, Lady Stuart said, shouldn't have dragged Sharn into this. Deeply grateful you told me, Catherine. Out of nowhere, she mentioned she remembered she had to rush off and visit her father, saying she'd tell the story after she arrives there. The princess's friends said they'd do the same, and thanked Sharon for the good time. When Sharon was the only one left at the table, Catherine said all the effort she put into baking this dessert was going to waste now. She complained that the ladies could have at least tried a single bite before running off. Sharon wondered aloud if the head maid's story about His Majesty's actions that night was actually true. Catherine said the girl already knew everything. After all, His Majesty couldn't even sleep soundly without her. It suddenly hit the protagonist why the Emperor looked so awful that day, and why he'd turned so cold out of nowhere. Clearly, he was just completely worn out from spending the whole night searching for his personal attendant. So, what Sharon saw that night wasn't just her overactive imagination after all. She knew she'd let His Majesty down again. The main character was desperate to figure out how to make it up to him. Suddenly, a snow-white cat named Albert bursts into Sharon and Catherine's tent. No one's noticed the bloodstains on its collar yet. The head maid was baffled by the cat's presence, especially since it had a bell. That means it's someone's pet. Sharon inwardly scoffed at calling it a cat. It looked more like a cat-dog hybrid than anything. Catherine declared they needed to find its owner ASAP and reached out to touch it. But at that moment, the animal pulled out its sharp claws and scratched Madame's arm. Sharon sprinted over to the head maid instantly, asking if she was okay. Catherine said she just yelped from surprise. But honestly, it wasn't a big deal. Right then, Sharon caught the princess calling out the animal's name. Diana called the name Nabi loudly and claimed she'd finally tracked it down. She said the cat deserved a scolding for scratching someone without reason. That's just rude. Sharon's thoughts raced. Had she heard that name before somewhere? So this was the Nabi Lady Eaton warned her to stay clear of. Collins burst into the tent, trying to push his mom to get it wrapped. Catherine shot back it was nonsense, just a cat scratch. Still, even after the doc took a look, the head maid wasn't improving. She'd cry out from pain every few minutes, and the wound kept twitching, burning like hell. Sharon said black poison was oozing from the injury. Normal folks wouldn't spot it without magic training, but to her, it was glaringly obvious. The girl realized she was right all along. This animal was the culprit. Turns out, the Chancellor's not keeping a cat. It's a beast. She announced the poison was on its claws. That's why the headmaid was in agony. Collins and Catherine gaped at their mom in stunned silence. Sharon said human meds won't work, and since the Chancellor's magic made this beast, things are even worse. She added there's only one way out. We have to kill Nabby. That's the only way the poison and curse will break. Colin obviously hated the idea, but it was the only shot at saving the headmaid. Catherine was ranting about how unpredictable life was, but she stressed we couldn't let the king know about this incident. Sharon grabbed Sir Colin and started whispering in his ear. Then the Emperor approached the tent. The second Julian stepped through the door, he noticed Sharon touching his assistant. But instead of explaining, Sharon bolted out of the tent, shouting apologies. They had to hurry. The Emperor shot them a look of pure disdain. Sharon said she nearly had a heart attack running into His Majesty on the way here. Then she glanced at Colin and asked, "What's with your face?" He muttered, "Everything's fine." He raised an eyebrow. "So what's this about, private talk?" She asked if he could lend her a dagger. She added she felt this was something she had to handle alone. No outside help. Colin's eyes went wide. "You think Sharon's gonna do it herself?" She cut him off. "Exactly." She wrapped up, "I'm taking out Nabby with my own hands." She explained that if it gets out right now that the Chancellor's pet is a monster, and it attacked the economist, everything will blow way out of control. The hunting tournament will turn into a battlefield, and this is the Chancellor's territory. All factors are completely against His Majesty. Colin doubted this plan big time. He asked Sharn if she was actually sure she could handle this on her own. The girl agreed, but said she'd need the guy's help to distract the Chancellor. Sharn said if Colin set up a distraction, she'd go after Nabby and end this before Catherine's wounds get worse. Sharn said since she was in the hunting tournament, she might as well test her strength. Back in her childhood, she'd swing sticks around the courtyard all the time. The hunt started, and everyone ran into the forest. Diana finally caught up to His Highness and shouted, "There you are!" She'd wanted to see the Emperor before the hunt began. She was curious if her family's land met the Emperor's standards, even though the Chancellor's estate is already world famous, right? Meanwhile, Julian barely listened to the princess and kept staring at Colin and Sharn, who stood way too close for his taste. He wondered what the hell they were whispering about. Even when Julian was riding full speed across rivers on horseback, he never looked back, eyes locked on the horizon. But at some point, his senses spread out like a spiderweb, dragging his attention to Sharn and Colin without him even realizing it. Meanwhile, Albert was prepping for the hunt like a madman, asking his dogs, "You've missed the taste of blood, haven't you?" He promised them a show real soon, and then the gunshot cracked. The birds scattered in a panic at the sound of the gunshot. The dogs barked and took off running. Shireen and Colin watched with curiosity as the Chancellor dashed after the dogs, his head down. With his peripheral vision, Albert caught sight of Shireen hiding behind a tree. The Chancellor smirked, noting someone was tailing him. "Time for Nab to go hunting," he said. "Go ahead, kill without holding back." Colin urgently shouted to Shireen, "Nab's heading this way, be careful!" She declared she was ready and told Sir Colin, "Watch your step too." Shireen gripped her sword tighter and sent a silent message to the Chancellor. Nab wouldn't be coming back to her master. Nab's coming in fast. Shireen's ready to leap out and shout, "Halt where you stand!" But a stupid stick messed everything up. As she untangled herself, her eyes landed on a grand mansion. Weird that such a beautiful house is so deep in the woods. Could this grandeur belong to the Chancellor? Shireen wondered. Was this the same place she'd heard whispers about during the pre-hunt tea gathering? Rumors said Albert's estate was buried in these woods. That's why Nab found it in a heartbeat. She realized this could be a shortcut. If she managed to corner the cat inside, taking it down would be easier. The garden looked well kept, but the mansion was empty, dark, and creepy. Probably because the house was swallowed by thick woods. Sharon was wondering where the heck that animal had hidden itself. She tried to figure out what kind of monstrous thing Nabby was. If it was made with magic, destroying it wouldn't be easy. Then she heard a faint jingle from Nabby's collar. Could that bloodthirsty animal be right behind her? It happened in a flash. Nabby's claws didn't just scrape Sharon, they carved through her skin. She groaned from the searing pain in her neck wound, but Nabby wasn't done. Another attack was already coming, so the main heroine forced herself to stay calm and end this thing. The author cranks up the tension and cuts to the forest, where the Emperor takes a shot. The shot was dead on. Julian dropped the deer. A crowd of nobles swarmed the Emperor, cheering how awesome he was. One guy even shouted he wanted to learn from him. Albert rolled his eyes bitterly. His secretary muttered, "It'd be awkward if the princess were here, because then they'd be picking between the future husband and a loving father." Albert sneered, "That kid Emperor's thriving like a fish in water." Then he smirked and asked, "How long can this last?" He was thrilled. After all, he'd bloodied his hands crafting and breaking in that cat. One touch from those claws or fangs, and the Emperor's favorite woman would be dead. The Chancellor was dying to see the Emperor's face when they found her body cold and lifeless. The hunting competition wrapped up. Sharn should have been back by now. Collins was starting to panic. He got this gnarly idea. What if they were hunting her or something went wrong? The Lord crept up behind him and asked, "What's got you so worked up, assistant?" Collins jumped, said the Emperor nearly gave him a heart attack. "Why's he look so tense since the tournament started?" he asked. The guy muttered, "Is it that bad? I'll explain later," he said. "Remember when you had that same look when your first crush hooked up with the neighbor's prince?" He grabbed Collins by the collar and hissed, "If you don't want to die, you better start talking." Then Collins admitted Sharn went after Navi. Julian double-checked. He thought he'd misheard. Collins repeated it, added that this was super dangerous. The Emperor was lost. He broke it down quick, ending with, "If we don't kill that cat, his mom's in trouble." Collins spilled the plan. He was the decoy while Sharn went in. Julian was fuming. "Why didn't you tell me?" he roared. Collins reminded him the king needed to keep his eyes on Princess Diana. Besides, the guy didn't want to stir up trouble on the Chancellor's turf while his mom was there. He said he was ready to take responsibility, to do whatever it took to get her back. Maybe she was poisoned by that monster venom. The Emperor shot back that he didn't have to do it. He added he didn't see the point in going through all that extra trouble. His words cut sharper than a sword. Julian's moment of clarity hit out of nowhere. His emotions were finally louder than cold logic. You can't just push feelings like that under the rug. No matter how many times he tried, nothing worked. One attempt after another, zip, zero, nothing. He declared Sharn was his responsibility. He'd go find her himself. Meanwhile, the heroine was laying it all on the line, fighting like hell against that bloodthirsty beast. Sharn froze, watching that purple blood drip down the dagger's edge. There was only one possible explanation. She realized with cold dread, standing before her was a real-life fluffy monster. Thoughts sliced through her like a blade. 1 second of hesitation, and it'd be a fatal mistake. In her mind, she reached out to Nami, told her to remember her face. It'd be the last thing she saw. Sharn sprinted, dagger raised, but the cat slipped away in the last split second. She laughed, asking what the rush was. Her laughter echoed way too loud in the empty palace. The monster twisted like a snake, dodging the dagger. Suddenly, the elusive creature lunged at the heroine and bit her. Viewers can probably imagine the curses Sharn was hurling at the beast. Her heart pounded wildly. She couldn't afford to make those mistakes again. She vowed the next strike had to be perfect. Sharn swallowed hard, gripping the dagger tighter. When the cat lunged again, she focused with everything she had. And the dagger struck true, blood splattering across the floor. Exhausted, Sharn collapsed. She gasped for breath, scanning the room, whispering, "Where the hell is that bastard?" Her hand clenched the sword hilt. She could feel the enemy coming, exactly now, when her strength was nearly gone. Weakness and tremors coursed through her limbs. Her legs gave out, and she collapsed. The world blurred. Passing out now would be a death sentence. Sharn told herself to hang on. Then she heard footsteps beyond the door. The doors burst open. Sharn saw the Emperor standing before her. He leaned over her, his voice soft as he said her name, then told her he knew everything. Julian asked if she'd found and destroyed Albert the cat, but Sharn stayed silent, so he tried asking again. But instead of answering, she let out an emotional cry. From the start, Julian was sure Sharn would end up wherever he was going. Even logically, it didn't make sense. He felt this invisible thread connecting him to Sharn, so he pushed forward, trusting his gut. The Emperor's mind clouded with worry, haunted by terrifying visions. His rage was insane. She kept taking on all the danger herself. Yet when Sharn saw her rescuer, all she could do was shout something about some monster. She rambled that it wasn't just a stray dog or some wild animal. She said it was a mutated creation, something unnatural, born from magic. Julian admitted he'd already heard it from Colin, but he was curious. Why hadn't she told him? He was furious. Had Sharn completely lost her mind, going in alone against something so dangerous? He demanded to know, what would she have done if she'd died before he arrived? And why did she always take everything on herself? Sharn said she didn't want to bother His Majesty. And besides, it was the Chancellor's territory. She added that the only thing that mattered now was making sure that monster stopped breathing. She explained she'd wounded the creature a few times. It had to be hiding somewhere in the mansion. Sharn said they needed to confirm it was dead. The Emperor replied he understood. Then he spoke with a concerned tone, saying the girl had already done enough. She needed to rest now. Julian whispered that he'd handle the rest himself. Suddenly, Pachan appeared before her eyes, vanishing into the thick water. She screamed for him to hold on tighter, but in an instant, everything was gone. The main character thought, had all that just been a dream? She felt a searing heat. When she turned around, she realized everything was on fire. His Majesty stood in the middle of the blaze. She thanked him for letting her rest. The Emperor didn't react. She finally shouted to him, asking if he was okay. The main character asked what to do. The mansion was ruined. How could she explain this to the Chancellor? Julian said he didn't care. Even if Albert demands an investigation, he complained about feeling lousy. His heartbeat was off, irregular. Sharn anxiously asked for details. Was it arrhythmia? The Emperor clarified. His heart no longer listened to him, and the next second, he pressed his lips against the main character's. But she let out a furious shout and pushed His Majesty away. What the hell is he even doing? Then Julian declared he'd made up his mind. Sharn begged the Emperor not to say a word. He was stunned. Why not? The girl shot back. How could she accept that His Majesty's got feelings for her? The Emperor of Valdek's head over heels for a servant girl from Cerseum Island, even though there's a noble lady right by his side, way more fit to be Empress. Sharn knew she only had a contract with the Emperor, a role to play, nothing more. She couldn't forget her place. Julian told the girl she wasn't getting out of this now. It was all set in stone. Not even he could undo it. He said he tried to run, terrified of these crazy feelings, but his desires tangled up like threads in a knot. The young man told her he couldn't resist anymore. He admitted he craved more than the throne. Sharn too. She took hold of him, just like the thirst for power. Now even his cold heart's burning. All the nobles, Julian, Albert, the lot, gathered at the Chancellor's palace. The Emperor said he understood the Chancellor was torn up about the fire at his manor, but it was unavoidable. Albert smirked sarcastically, tossing out a rhetorical question, like there was really nothing that could have been done. He kept saying he'd never seen anything so inevitable in his life. His Majesty said if the Chancellor's cat wasn't a monster to begin with, none of this would have happened. He explained the animal attacked his personal maid and lead housekeeper. They had to torch the estate to destroy it. The Emperor reminded the Chancellor that if a monster poisoned someone, the only solution is to destroy it. The nobles whispered that burning down the Chancellor's palace was overkill, but justified if the cat was truly a monster. A lot of people were wondering if Lady Stuart knew about this. The Chancellor said if the Emperor was so jealous of the palace, he'd be happy to give it to him. Too bad things turned out this way. Julian noted the Chancellor was being generous, but he's got his own place, the Imperial Palace. He jealously added that his palace is way cozier than that flashy cottage built on the people's taxes. Julian asked, "Isn't it kind of ridiculous from the start that the Emperor depends on a vassal?" In his opinion, it's absurd. It can't keep going like this.